Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome each and every one of you here today and thank you for taking the time to come and participate in this Open Policy Forum. I think this is a very important day to review where we are and where we've come from, what we're actually doing well, and where, as a country, we need to improve in relation to the whole area of digital safety. This is an open policy debate, and the agenda is being set by all of you as the participants here. And we're looking forward to hearing the contributions from the panellists, but also the contributions, thoughts and ideas from the floor here as well. I want to thank the facilitator, Caroline McKinley, and I particularly want to also thank my ministerial colleagues and their department officials for the assistance that they have provided to us in organising this event. This is very much a whole of government approach, and it will build on, from here we will build on developing an action plan by the summer, a government action plan in relation to this particular issue. I think to show how serious the government is taking this issue, we're delighted to have Taoiseach Leo Varadkar here to give the welcome address. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Taoiseach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And I'd like to start by offering a very sincere and heartfelt Happy International Women's Day to all of the women in the audience. Reasonably gender balanced this morning, so delighted to see that at the very least. I think it's fair to say that a week is a long time in politics, and a lot can change in a week. This time last week, the snow was falling, and in our collective response to that extreme weather, the worst snowstorm in 35 years, if not 70 years, we saw people and organisations at all levels working together to keep us safe. It was and is a great example of how shared effort and effective coordination across government and across society can work. The response also showed that while government and the state has a role to play in ensuring public safety, the state doesn't have all the answers and can never provide all of the solutions. We got through the extreme weather relatively unscathed because citizens exercised common sense, were given clear advice, and by and large followed it. People were advised to stay indoors during the worst of the storm, to avoid unnecessary journeys and so on. And they heeded the advice and kept their families and friends safe and out of harm's way. I believe the state has a duty to keep its citizens safe. However, in the main, as we demonstrated last week, this is best done by providing advice and safeguards, by allowing people to exercise their own common sense, with coercion and prescription being tools of last resort and rarely being the most effective. The same perhaps applies in other areas as well. It's now almost impossible to imagine a world without the internet, but as somebody rapidly approaching 40, I actually do, but I'm increasingly aware that a lot of people don't. And it's almost impossible to imagine a future where the internet has less of a role in our day-to-day lives than it does today. And everyone has their own thoughts as to whether it's for good or ill. I'm very much for the former. I think it's been a good force in the main. But irrespective of one's own perspective, we have to acknowledge that these developments bring real risks. And our role is to manage that risk. We cannot stand like King Canute on the shore and demand that the tide retreat, because it will not. There are bad people offline, and it's no surprise that there are also bad people online. And the internet makes it much easier for them to get together, to get access to each other, and to get access to other people. And there's also an enormous variation in the types of illegal content and harmful activity to be found on the internet. At one end of the spectrum, there's serious criminal content, such as child sex abuse material. However, we also need strategies to deal with harmful content which is not classified as criminal, such as cyberbullying and websites that encourage suicide or anorexia. Similarly, there is a variation in the providers of harmful content. Some are manipulative criminals, others are ordinary users of the internet, and some are children themselves. So our response has to be nuanced to take account of these differences, and our response must also be realistic. Something that works rhetorically or works on paper won't survive an enterprising teenager in many cases, and if so, it's not worth pursuing. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the most appropriate response from government to the range of online risks? Is the answer greater law enforcement? Is it better education of parents and young people in how to stay safe online? Is it more legislation or stricter rules about how businesses behave on the internet? And I think the answer inevitably has to be a mix of these, and perhaps more. And we must also be honest with ourselves. Government action alone will not and cannot remove all risks from the internet. Government on its own cannot act. It needs individuals, parents, educators, industry and law enforcement playing their roles to make the internet a much safer place. And as the internet affects all aspects of our lives, the only approach that will be truly effective is one that involves all stakeholders playing their part. And this, as you know, is a serious issue with an international dimension. Decisions on how we can best provide the kinds of protections we seek requires recognizing the global nature of the internet. It is the World Wide Web, after all. It involves ensuring up-to-date legal frameworks are in place, which are fit for purpose in an area that is developing and changing at a rapid speed, often much faster than legislators are capable of legislating. Understanding and recognizing the need to develop proportionate, feasible and effective responses to a spectrum of activity from harmful through to criminal activity. Today's event, as you know, has been coordinated by 6 government departments, represented here by 6 ministers. They all have a policy role in relation to online safety. And it's important, we believe, as a government, to be open and to learn from others, both colleagues within government and government departments and agencies, but also those from outside. And as a government, we're committed to developing more open approaches to policy making such as this. So we're going to try to achieve that by including people like you, networks of practitioners, academics, experts in the field, in developing and debating policy options at an early stage. Today's debate is designed so that we can have an open discussion about what Ireland's priorities should be when it comes to online safety. I know you indicated the topics you'd like to see discussed today, and I'm not surprised that at the top of the list of topics was greater education and awareness. A large amount of work is already underway in several government departments and agencies, by the European Union and also by industry and other stakeholders. This was demonstrated recently by the attendance of 4 government ministers at the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children and Youth Affairs, where they outlined the work already undertaken across government. We need to do more, but we also need to be better at raising awareness of what's already being done. For example, the guidance material that's produced by the Office of Internet Safety, the Be in Control initiative developed for schools by Webwise in conjunction with the Garda Síochána, and of course reporting mechanisms like hotline.ie. I think empowering individuals through awareness and raising initiatives and education to stay safe online is particularly important when legislation might improve impractical or unenforceable in some cases. The role of government, industry and stakeholders is the second most important issue identified by you for your discussion today. So it's important that we consider the role of national governments in making the internet a safer place for children. In this context, it's essential that the work of national governments can align and support the efforts at European level or even international level to promote online safety. And that's why I want to extend a special welcome to Ms. Gail Kent, who I met briefly on the way in. She's the Director of Data Economy at the European Commission, and she will shortly give us an overview on the range of actions that the European Commission is taking in this area. Online safety in this area, for obvious reasons, demands a European approach. I think another important question is the role of industry and what it should do and how it should play a role in supporting online safety. In the long run, I believe that companies can only survive, can only thrive, and can only remain profitable if they enjoy social acceptance. Therefore, surely it's in the best long-term interest of industry to be part of the solution to online safety. And I'm delighted to acknowledge their presence here today and their desire to do that. I think we must also consider how we can work collectively with voluntary organisations, with parents and schools in creating solutions. And we must give particular attention and thought to the role of young people in making the internet safer. Every child in this country is a digital native. It's intrinsic and natural to them in their lives, as electricity was to previous generations. And any initiatives in online safety that don't empower young people, treat them as passive actors, simply won't work in my view. We all know that water is dangerous, and children are taught from a young age to respect it and to be careful around it. But children are also taught to swim, because avoiding water is not the answer. The third issue you identified was regulatory changes, ranging from the digital age of consent to the regulation of online advertising and enhanced regulation of industry. There are significant issues in each of these proposed changes that cut across the full range of government departments represented here today. There are some reasons why an open policy debate is the most appropriate forum to discuss the various ideas and debate their merits or otherwise in a reasoned way. So to conclude, I want to thank you all very much for taking time out to be here today, to participate in what I hope will be a number of open policy debates in a number of different areas. And I particularly want to thank Minister Naughton for his leadership in promoting a cross-government response to internet safety and for making today's event happen. The report of today's deliberations will shape that work, and it's our intention as a government by the end of June to set out an action plan for an integrated set of actions and measures which we will use to improve online safety at all levels. So thank you once again, and I wish you a very successful and productive discussion this morning.
Thanks very much, Taoiseach. The Taoiseach has to leave us now because, as you know, we have a cabinet meeting kicking off later on this morning. But we will now have a short video presentation.
The Internet offers a wealth of opportunities to Irish citizens and creates new ways to communicate and share knowledge. However, the Internet also brings risks and the potential for harm, especially for children and young people. The types of risks vary from the most serious criminal content, such as child sexual abuse material, to abusive or hurtful comments. The perpetrators similarly vary from criminals to ordinary users, some of whom are young people themselves. Given the range of different material, no one single action is going to fix the Internet. Individuals, parents, educators, industry, law enforcement and governments all have a role to play in online safety. As the Internet doesn't stop at the border between one country and another, part of the solution must be multinational as well. The European Union has legislated for illegal online content and is examining further measures. Industry obviously has a crucially important role to play, and they have taken steps to make the Internet a safer place. The Internet affects every aspect of our lives. There's a lot of work happening in a number of government departments and agencies. Let's hear about some of the work that's underway.
There is no difference between the online and offline world. The online world is the real world. It educates, informs, and entertains. But it also has people who want to harm our children. To prevent this, we have record-breaking investment on child protection, 750 million euros a year, awareness campaigns for parents, and we engage with children every day about internet usage. Look at Corlin and Ogue and Clare partnering with internet giant McAfee to develop a safety program that is not only going nationwide, but also has gone international.
Through WebWise, an online service, we've put resources in the hands of both teachers and students to ensure that they can be in control when they're using the internet. And we've developed with the Gardaí ways of being alert to what are the potential threats, and we've put in place 80 young student ambassadors who are going out into the schools themselves to bring that message about what constitutes safe and respectful use of the internet. We believe that this is really important and it is working, but we always have to be alert to potential threats, and technology is evolving and this will have to evolve with it.
Strategies such as Connecting for Life help combat online dangers that can impact negatively on mental health. I will continue to develop our mental health legislation, policies and services to meet future needs. The health sector will fully play its part to enhance online safety, particularly around awareness and resilience for young people. I would encourage any young person who has mental health difficulties to seek help as soon as possible. The sooner this is done, the sooner the road to recovery begins.
The e-commerce directive is the basis for rules on internet activity. This states that platforms are only required to remove or examine content if the issue is brought to their attention. There has been huge changes in the internet since the inception of the directive. I and my officials are heavily involved in the Commission's review on this matter. We are striving for a position that is both positive for business, but also for users and especially for the young and vulnerable people.
My department deals with the criminal and legal aspects of internet safety. We have strong laws to protect children. Last year, we introduced new offences to target child exploitation. Operation Catch is a Garda operation which targets those who possess and distribute horrific material that exploits vulnerable children. My department supports organisations to promote internet safety and oversees hotline.ie, an anonymous facility for internet users to report suspected illegal content accidentally encountered online in a secure and confidential way. This mechanism includes a notice and takedown procedure for illegal material.
We're here today to learn from each other. There's a lot of work being done across a range of government departments in this area, as some of my colleagues have just outlined. But we need to communicate our work better and demonstrate a much more joined-up approach to online safety. We can never be complacent in this area. Today's debate is not a one-way conversation. We all have a role in making the internet a safer place. Whether you're from industry, an NGO, a parent like myself, an educator, or a young person, it is only by learning from each other that we can really address these issues that affect us all. Thank you for attending, and I look forward to hearing your ideas and feedback. The outcome of today's debate will ensure future policies reflect our common concerns. Thanks very much. I'm now going to introduce our facilitator, Caroline McKinley, and I want to excuse my colleagues, Minister Zappone, Minister Bruton, Minister Stanton and Minister Daly, who are getting ready for the Cabinet meeting. So, Caroline, I'll hand over to you.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Caroline McCamley. I'm the facilitator for the day, which essentially means that I'm going to get you to 1:30 with the job done, hopefully. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to be here today and to work with you and to open the proceedings in relation to the inputs from many of the experts that we have in the room, and to start with Gail Kent. The Taoiseach has slightly stolen my line because he kind of introduced her already. But you're very welcome, Gail. We're very much looking forward to hearing the European perspective because, as has already been alluded to, this is an issue that we can't deal with on our own. It's not going to happen like that. And the international and particularly the European context is going to be very important in how we approach this work. So I'm very happy to hand you over to Gail.
Good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here at the Open Policy Debate, aimed at raising awareness on the wide variety of issues at stake for online safety, especially for children. I really welcome this discussion, and I believe it's highly relevant and timely because the borders between our physical and digital lives are becoming increasingly blurred. New technologies emerge day after day. They offer great opportunities. for communication, for learning, creativity, mobility, productivity, and in many more areas. At the same time, they keep bringing about new challenges and risks. It's therefore essential that we take an informed and holistic approach to address these uncharted waters. The European Commission is closely following developments in the online environment and has been at the forefront of addressing existing and emerging challenges, such as illegal content, fake news, hate speech, or cyberbullying through complementary measures. I will start by mentioning a very recent initiative. On the 1st of March, the Commission published a recommendation on measures to effectively tackle illegal content online to strengthen the messages contained in the communication on the same subject published last September. The aim of the recommendation is to encourage online platforms to take proactive measures to ensure swifter removal of illegal content online, in particular in the area of terrorism, hate speech, and child abuse. In the case of terrorist content, the Commission recommends specific provisions to curb it further, notably the 1-hour rule. This would require all companies to remove such content within 1 hour of its referral as a general rule, as such material is most harmful in the first hours that it appears online. There are other recommended operational measures. Clearer notice and action procedures for notifying illegal content, including fast-track procedures for the so-called trusted flaggers. More efficient tools and proactive technologies to detect and remove illegal content, in particular for content which does not need contextualization to be deemed illegal, like counterfeited goods or child sexual abuse. Stronger safeguards to ensure fundamental rights, especially when automated tools are used to remove content, such as human oversight and verification. We need special attention to small companies through voluntary industry arrangements to share experiences and share technological solutions. And closer cooperation with law enforcement authorities, which should be promptly informed by companies when there is evidence of criminal offence or suspicion of threatening content. The Commission will monitor the actions taken in response to this new recommendation to determine whether further steps are required, including legislation if necessary. Our aim is to ensure that the Internet remains a place of free and democratic expression, where European laws are respected. We must, however, fight against the proliferation of incitement to racist and xenophobic violence and hatred online, as this fuels fear and then reduces the space for open democratic exchanges. It's important to strike the right balance here. A recent European survey showed that 75% of those that follow or participate in debates online have come across some episodes of abuse, threats or hate speech, for example, against journalists, bloggers, or people active on the web. As a consequence, almost half of them felt inhibited to engage further in online discussions. There is a specific EU legislation, the Framework Decision on Combating Racism and Xenophobia, which calls on member states to criminalize hate speech inciting to violence and hatred, including in the online sphere. Additionally, in May 2016, the Commission presented together with Facebook, Microsoft, Google, YouTube, and Twitter a code of conduct on countering illegal hate speech online. Through this instrument, the 4 platforms agreed to assess, against national legislation implementing EU law on hate speech, the majority of users' notifications within 24 hours and committed to remove messages considered illegal. The 4 companies also committed to improving the support to civil society as well as the coordination with national authorities. The results of monitoring the implementation of the code showed that the results regarding illegal hate speech online are positive, and the trend is encouraging. On average, IT companies responded by removing more than 70% of the content notified as deemed manifestly illegal, compared to 59% 6 months ago and only 28% a year ago. The number of notifications reviewed within 24 hours has also significantly gone up. All companies fully met the target of reviewing the majority of the notifications within a day. These encouraging results show that a collaborative approach, together with IT companies, civil society, and member states, can work. An important area where further work remains to be done, however, is transparency towards users, meaning proper feedback, which is a fundamental guarantee for freedom of expression online. There is also a pressing need to address the rising dangers linked to fake news and disinformation online, which the Commission has committed to tackle even when the content is not illegal per se. To this aim, the Commission has launched a public consultation and appointed a high-level expert group consisting of social media platforms, media organizations, civil society, and experts such as journalists and academia. The group's work will feed into the Commission's communication on fake news, which will be published later this year. This soft law approach is complemented by specific legislative proposals dealing with certain illegal content online, namely the Child Sexual Abuse Directive, which obliges member states to take the necessary measures to ensure the prompt removal of child sexual abuse material hosted in their territory, and to endeavour to obtain the removal of such pages hosted outside their territory. The member states have made considerable efforts to comply with their obligations. However, some of them are still facing challenges, in particular with respect to prevention and support to victims. The Commission continues to monitor and to support the implementation of the directive. The Commission also proposed to amend the Audiovisual Media Services Directive to bring it in line with the new realities. As you know, viewers, and particularly minors, are moving from traditional TV to the online world. Therefore, the revised directive seeks to ensure protection of minors also online, foreseeing a limited extension of the scope to platforms. Video sharing platforms will be obliged to put in place measures such as tools for users to report and flag harmful content, age verification, or parental control systems, to be implemented via co-regulation to protect minors from harmful content. The Commission puts great emphasis in the directive on co-regulatory and self-regulatory instruments, considering the active support of the service providers is necessary, and that this approach allows for more flexibility than can accommodate the different legal traditions of each member state. The proposal for the revised directive is currently under discussion in the European Parliament and the Council. We believe that it will be possible to find a balanced solution. And now I come to the area which I personally handle, which is the Safer Internet Centres. In order to protect and empower children and young people to grow into responsible digital citizens, the Commission co-funds Safer Internet Centres in 27 member states, plus Iceland and Norway. This includes Webwise, the Irish Safer Internet Centre, who are participating later today. The main task of the Safer Internet Centres is to raise awareness and foster digital literacy among minors, parents, and teachers regarding risks minors may encounter online, such as cyberbullying, sexting, self-harm, and ways to protect them. They also offer helpline counselling on online issues and hotlines, allowing internet users to anonymously report child sexual abuse content for quick removal in cooperation with the law enforcement agencies. The Commission also facilitates the Alliance to Better Protect Minors Online, a self-regulatory initiative aimed to improve the online environment for children and young people. Over 40 leading ICT and media companies, even toy companies, NGOs, and UNICEF are joining efforts and have made individual commitments to address online risks such as harmful content and behavior. Every year, the Commission's flagship event, Safer Internet Day, reaches millions of children, parents, and teachers worldwide to raise awareness about online safety. This year alone, over 140 countries celebrated the day with events, workshops, and other interesting activities. Our new Commissioner Maria Gabriel, took this opportunity to launch the Safer Internet for EU campaign, which will run throughout 2018 and raise awareness on child safety online, media literacy, and cyber hygiene. It will reach all relevant stakeholders, and we invite everyone to be active in supporting the campaign through various means and concrete actions. To conclude, the European Commission is addressing the issues and risks related to harmful or illegal content online in different ways and in cooperation with all relevant stakeholders. We will continue to closely monitor the developments and respond with appropriate measures to ensure we can all benefit from the online environment in a way that is safe and fair, and that fosters a wider culture of online safety and cyber hygiene for our future generations. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that, Gail. I think a very useful sense of the complexity of the issues, but also of the wide range of activity that's going on at a European level to try and tackle the issues. And I've no doubt we'll be exploring those issues in a lot more detail today. That is the end of session one, but there's no break, so don't be thinking you're going to get coffee or anything like that at this stage. But it's an opportunity for me just to thank the ministers for being here, all of the ministers for being here. I know that there's a really important cabinet meeting today. I'm sure if that hadn't been the case, we might have had a little bit more in and out from some of them. So thank you very much for that, and particularly to thank Gail for kicking us off really well. So perhaps I could now ask the panellists for the next session to swap places and to come up, and we'll get that session going. So thank you very much. Thank you. We'll see you later. Great. Thanks, David. Take care. Bye-bye. Do you want to stay up here or do you want to sit down? I think I can see them better. Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, so just while the first panellists are taking their seats, maybe just a couple of comments in relation to the whole day. So as has been said, the idea is to have a really good open discussion here. And because we've people coming from many different backgrounds, many different sets of expertise, it's a real opportunity to kind of get into the nitty-gritty. Both the Taoiseach, I think, and the Minister and Gail have commented on the fact that this has to be a collaborative approach. We have to have everybody involved in addressing these issues, otherwise it's simply not going to work. So I'd ask you, particularly during the day, to enter into these discussions in an open way. I know you will, but perhaps to bear in mind that it would be really useful to engage with each other rather than to advocate. And one of the things that's really important about a day like today is it is an opportunity to widen the networks. Some of you may know each other really, really well, and some of you may be meeting for the first time. So do please use the day to have an opportunity to talk to people, particularly from other sectors or from other organisations that you may not know, because this will be an ongoing conversation. There's no doubt about that, and the action that needs to be taken will be taken over quite a long period of time. So I was reminded of that the other day. I came across something about the first motor car was sold commercially in something like 1888, but it was something like 50 years before they got around to doing things like licenses and driving tests in Britain. So these new technologies do take time, and maybe there were groups like this in 1890s having a discussion about how they were going to handle the motor car. So this is the motor car of today. I'd like to welcome the first panel. The way the panel is going to work is quite informal. We're going to get a discussion going, get a sense of what different organisations and different people are doing on the issues. And this is really to inform the table discussions, which we will then get to. So we have a really good mixed panel for you. And we're going to be thinking about things like education and awareness, the role of the government and stakeholders, and the regulatory changes that might be necessary. as we deal with this issue. So these were some of the issues that were particularly prioritised by participants today. You have bios in your packs, so I'm not going to get into a lengthy description of everybody if you have a quick look. But just to welcome everybody, we have from Google, Ryan Mead, from the Children's Rights Alliance, Tanya Ward, from An Garda Síochána, Detective Superintendent Declan Daly, from the National Parents Council, Anya Lynch, Hotline.ie, Anna Nicolescu, and from the WebWise Advisory Panel, Shifra Harkin. And I think sometimes in the discussions that we have about any of these kinds of issues and how we're going to manage and plan and all of that, we do forget that young people's views are actually so central to this issue, but also that they have a lot to teach us. And I think that's a really valuable part of today, is that everybody is in the room, not just the industry and the NGOs and government. We have everybody in the room that's concerned, parents, young people, teachers, and so on. So I'm going to ask Tanya to kick off. I'm going to keep it kind of informal. I'll ask each panellist to say a few things, and they may ask each other questions as well, and I may ask them some questions, and we'll try and keep it to time. Okay, so Tanya.
Okay, thank you very much. So in my 4 minutes, I suppose I wanted to give you a survey of some of the issues that we see in the Children's Rights Alliance that are fundamental for this debate. And I have to say, I think this debate is really timely. It's great to see so many ministers coming together and committing to actually take action in the online safety world. So a third of global users at the moment are children under the age of 18. That is pretty staggering when you think of the internet and the online world. So it really tells you that we need to be putting children at the very centre of developing laws and policies and practices when it comes to the online world. In Ireland, the research is telling us that the first experience of using the internet on average is about 9, but you'll always read the newspapers and hear of 4-year-olds that are on the internet as well. So we're looking at very young children being on the internet. So what does that mean, and what kind of impact does that have on them? Well, what's really happening, I suppose, in this debate is I think safety issues have been dominating this debate, and I think we need to look at it in a broader way and recognise that the holistic child, the whole child, the fact that a child has rights. We have them in the Constitution. We got out as a people in 2012 and we gave them rights in the Constitution. So what does that mean? Well, it means when we're making decisions affecting them, we should be consulting them. We have to make decisions in their best interests. We can't discriminate against them. We have to protect them from abuse and neglect. We have to protect their privacy. And we have to respect their right to participation and expression. All of these matter on the online world as they do in the real world. But the other piece that we often forget from a children's rights approach is we have to support parents as well as the primary duty bearer, as the primary caregiver to protect and provide for their child. And that's part of a children's rights approach. So what are the issues overall? Well, on the privacy side, and I'm starting with the privacy side because of the recent debate around the digital age of consent, one of the big issues that we see is in relation to how children's data is being used by industry and tech companies. The same issues sometimes are true for adults, but it has a particular impact on children. So, for example, we know that children's data is used, is sold on. You'll hear situations where children are exposed to advertisements that are very inappropriate for them. Any of you listening to the debate on digital age consent last week, you would have heard Senator Linda Rand talk about her 10-year-old being exposed to advertisements for lip fillers and consistently being exposed to those kind of advertisements. We've seen research showing us that children between the ages of 12 and 17, about 70% of them will have been exposed to online advertising for alcohol. And if you think of the government is at the moment in the Oireachtas is pushing through legislation to delay the point that a child begins to start drinking and are using advertising controls to do that, doesn't cover online advertising. You can see the real gap there because we know if children are exposed to online advertising, any form of advertising, because they are more suggestive, they are more likely to be influenced by it. Other privacy issues relate to GP services, location services. They've kind of crept up upon us. Some children will talk about them being used and enabling bullies to be able to locate them. In very rare circumstances, it has to be said, you do get situations where predators are using location services to locate children. Children often don't know how to navigate and switch on the privacy protections on particular platforms. That's a whole package of issues at the moment. On the other side then, in the safety area, young people will talk about being exposed to inappropriate content quite often on different websites. And we know that when they're exposed to inappropriate content, particularly of a sexual nature, it can lead to early sexualization. We know that children and young people have been exposed to people who are grooming online. These are rare exceptions, it has to be said, but it does happen. And they don't necessarily have the skills and ability to understand what to do when that actually happens, because there's lots of different education measures out there, but what young people will say to you, they don't necessarily have the technical skills or what's called the evaluative skills to deal with these types of situations. And you have that same debate in child protection in the material world or the real world anyway. You can put lots of child protection measures in place, but you have to educate children and empower them from a very young age about the harm that can come to them in an appropriate way, and about how they can empower themselves and stand up for themselves as well. And obviously then the other safety issues at the further end that are very concerning is in relation to images of child sex abuse. As the Minister mentioned, we have new legislation, new offences there to try and target this type of crime. It is critically important. If you talk to organisations such as 1 in 4 that work with perpetrators of abuse, they will say they started off looking at images of child abuse and then they go on to harm a child. So we need to ask ourselves, are we putting enough in terms of giving Declan enough money and resources to investigate this type of crime? Does he have all the powers he needs to investigate this type of crime? And they're just a survey of some of the issues that are impacting on children. But when we're thinking about the solutions to all of this, we have to think about proportionate solutions, and we also have to think about the amount of good that the online world does do for children. It's really important for their life, their education. Most children, when you look at the surveys, they say they're using the online world to communicate with each other. And for very vulnerable children, let's say children who are LGBTI and are very isolated, they are using online forums to communicate with each other and to get support and to help them make decisions and talk to their parents about some of the issues that are impacting on their lives. So it's really important when we try and come up with these solutions that we do think about the positives of the online world and we balance our protective measures versus our access measures.
Okay, thanks for that, Tanya. So that's a really good opening, just to remind us all that we did actually give children's rights very, very formally. But can I maybe take up what you're saying about the fact that this is a medium that it's very easy for children to access, and for things that are, they may not be looking for inappropriate things, but that's what they can often find. And maybe I can turn to you, Anna, and you can tell us a little bit about what Hotline.ie is doing in this regard and how your organisation is approaching this issue.
Sure. By means of introduction, ISBAI is the legal entity running the Hotline.ie service. 2 decades ago, when ISBAI was established, the internet industry consisted of only internet access providers, to be precise, all 5 of them. Up to 2010, there was a reasonable balance between readiness for change and relatively steady but constant evolving internet uptake, industry, digital technologies, connected devices, and so on. I think we have reached a point where we cannot afford to spend a decade to learn, prepare, and adapt. We only have now. And for which we need to change the way we conceptualize and forge responses in the area of online safety, including child sexual abuse and exploitation, and take what we have learned collectively in order to amp it up and come up with innovative solutions that are fit for the future. We must start looking ahead and think in terms of how will a national response look in a 5 years time frame, taking into consideration, virtual reality, Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. However, as we are on a very tight schedule with a very ambitious agenda, I will move on to talking about what we currently do. So the hotline.ie service provides a mechanism to public where they can report anonymously suspected illegal content, particularly child sexual abuse imagery, legally known as child pornography. The hotline assesses all the reports that we get and determines whether or not they are possibly child pornography under Irish legislation. The hotline mission is to have every occurrence of child sexual abuse imagery removed from the internet, irrespective of where in the world it may be hosted, obviously with focus on the Irish jurisdiction. We also work as part of the Irish Safer Internet Centre alongside WebWise, ISPCC, NPC, and under the coordination of the Office for Internet Safety. We operate under strict procedures agreed with the Department of Justice and Equality and National Law Enforcement. Given the global nature of the internet, we work in collaboration with 51 other internet hotlines in 47 countries worldwide, which come together under the umbrella association known as InHope, and through InHope with Europol and Interpol. We make sure that every identified child sexual abuse imagery is contributed to Interpol's child sexual exploitation database to support law enforcement investigation and for the purpose of victim and offender identification. I'd have to say that the sheer existence of the hotline would not be possible without the collaborative support that we get from industry representatives, ISPI members, some of which I can see here today, like Virgin Media, Google, AIR, and obviously the grant aid support that we receive from the European Commission. So in terms of that kind of would be my...
Okay. Thanks for that. I mean, I think that gives us a sense of just the speed of change, that it's so hard to get on top of the current situation, and yet there's more technology coming really, really fast down the line.
Yes, and we need to make sure that we have a multidisciplinary approach to this whole area. We need to think, in terms of deterring predatory behavior and early intervention as well, is not just dealing with what we know today. And we also need to think what happens, in a world where child sexual abuse and exploitation is no longer image-based and no longer web-based. So I think we need to work with industry, particularly with large companies like Google, which obviously have abuse teams and own big data sets, and get a better understanding of this whole phenomenon and how it's evolving, emerging trends, distribution patterns, also movement patterns. And I have to say that particularly in the area of child sexual abuse and exploitation online, we need to have an international, multi-stakeholder, coordinated approach underpinned by the national model. And we need to work together. I think we can do so much more if we come together and use what we all know in trying to put out there solutions which, as I said, are innovative.
Okay, thanks for that, Anna. Damien, can I come to you from that? Because we have on the one hand the rights of children and the advantages and opportunities of technology. We have the work that's being done to try and constrain some of the bad things, but you're dealing with the leading edge of that bad stuff. So could you tell us a little bit about what the key issues for you at the moment are and where you see this going and what's needed in order to deal with it?
Well, firstly, you're all very welcome. I'm going to we're delighted to be here today. We're looking at the range of people that are here today, and it's encouraging to see that mix, and it's exciting to predict the conversation that's going to take place over the next couple of hours, and that's a very, very good thing. Obviously, on Garda Síochána, we, as you'd expect and as you know, our role is law enforcement, and specifically in around the targeting and the investigation of crimes. But in relation to abuse of children, there's a dual role there. So it's obviously, yes, it's the investigation of the crime, but also a huge remit there in child protection. Working with TUSLA is an exceptionally important part. And in relation to online abuse, working beyond those, those sort of internal state stakeholders is important as well. The few minutes that I have, I'm going to talk about the current trends, what we're seeing particularly at the moment, and the worrying aspects that we see. In terms of actions, I see our role, what we're targeting at the moment, is 3 specific roles at the moment. Obviously, the investigation. It's a very, very important that investigation role, that we target individuals, the perpetrators are online. You saw there from the video there, Operation Catch. That's the start of it. That's our proactive work. We do that work on a daily basis. Operation Catch was designed really to show, the community at large the importance that we put on targeting, and it's to show perpetrators themselves, to give them a sort of a shock and say, there's a knock coming to your door. And we will be doing Operation Catch for the rest of 2018, and then in 2019 we will run a similar operation as well, and into the future. Obviously, awareness is really important. I can't emphasise that. Education, awareness. If children are aware of the dangers, then they're forewarned, they're forearmed. It's important. Webwise and our own media campaigns are all vital aspects of that. Our collaboration with TUSLA, very, very important. That the state agencies are working together to protect children. That's really, really important. In terms of our current dangers, very quickly, and I know I'm speaking to an educated audience here, so forgive me for that. Online grooming, where children are targeted by paedophiles so that they can meet up with those children for the purpose of sexual encounters. That happens. We've had a couple of recent, high-profile cases, and you can see the dangers there. It's not just limited to certain type of people. It's open to all of them. So we put a lot of work into that to make sure that those people are protected. The industry, Facebook, Google, they give a lot of information. They provide a lot to NECMEC that allows us to have an early warning of that sort of where children are targeted. Catfishing. A catfish is a fish that is a fish, but it looks like a cat, and that's online. From an online perspective, you have an issue where somebody pretends to be a 15-year-old boy and is targeting, a young girl, but actually he's, a middle-aged man, a paedophile who has a sexual interest in children, and he's pretending to be somebody that he's not, in order to get images or to get, to meet that person, whatever. So that's really, really important that we target. They're very complex investigations, and that happens a lot. In relation to that type of crime, one of the worrying aspects of that crime is that we see, more frequently than I would like, is that sometimes we see young people themselves targeting children that way, so exploiting that way. Sex mailing, again, is another particular issue, and coercion is another particular issue where, perpetrators and suspects get information from, images maybe from a young person, and they use that image to blackmail them or sex mail them into providing other images or other types of things, and it can be horrific stuff for the child. And you can imagine as an adult how, if somebody had an image of you and was threatening to put that image up on Facebook or on Google or online on social media, how stressed out you would be. Imagine if you were a 13-year-old girl or a 13-year-old boy, the stress is there. So really what's important there, and I keep going back and saying all the time, is that, that communication pathway is very important, so that the child who receives that approach, that they know where to go, that they have that confidence to go to an adult, a parent or adult, and say, look, I have a problem here, I need help, because it's very difficult from dealing on their own. Harvesting, okay? having open settings and unsecured settings, people can go in there, just open the doors open, and they can walk in and they can take, images there, and they can use those images then, to put up on, prostitute websites or advertise child pornography websites, and people don't know that their images are being used. And that's a difficult, and they find out, and it's very upsetting for them and for their families. And sexting, again, the use of uploading self-generated image is a real problem for us. We see that time and time again, and it's very, very difficult to deal with, because children, where they might be shy and they might be guarded face-to-face with an adult or another young person, when it's online, they seem to let their guard down, and when their guard is down, then they're exposed. I mean, I was looking at, I have it with me here, and actually I used it in some of my talks. It's an actual extract from a chat that took place in a chat room between an adult and a young person, a very young girl of 12 years of age, and within 3 questions, the perpetrator was asking for a picture. So it's not a case whereby the online grooming takes. Sometimes it can build up over a long period of time, but in a lot of the cases it's very quick. And if the child says no or shuts down, well, then they move on to the next person. So this moves very, very quick. Another area where it was a new topical area, the difficult area for us, the police, is the live streaming, where somebody is paying for the live streaming of child abuse in another jurisdiction. Again, and they just delete the link then and it's gone, and we're evidentially we're in difficulties there in some cases. So we're looking at that, and that we're working with PayPal, and we're looking at metrics and that we can see can we see indicators for that. Obviously, all those dangers, all those type of crimes that happen online are there to target children. They can be difficult to investigate. And Gardaí simply can't do it on our own. We work very, very well with TUSLA in terms of our coordinated approach. So in relation to our self-taken images, which is our problem, as I said, when we approach the family, when we go to that family and we say, your son or daughter has uploaded an image onto social media, and we're here to talk to you about that. As the guards, we don't go alone. We bring TUSLA with us. So we're doing the criminal end of it. We're trying to find out, what has led the child into this. Why is the child sexualized? That the child is sending this image. And then TUSLA are there really importantly to deal with the welfare of the child and the welfare of the family, because it's a massive shock. You can imagine, in Garda Síochána and TUSLA arriving at your door and asking a question saying, look, your your son has uploaded an image. It's a massive shock to the family. So I'll finish up and say that it's not just one thing that's going to correct the dangers online to children. It's not just one body that's going to correct that. It's everybody in this room. It's all our agencies collectively that are working there. It's a bit like a wheel, with spokes in it. If all the spokes are in place and tight, the wheel is strong. If you take out one of the spokes, then the wheel is weak and collapses. So it's making sure that we have that strength, within the industry, within the state departments, within the NGO sectors, within our homes and within our communities. That's how we protect our children. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. It's kind of terrifying, really.
What's terrifying is that you can't really arrest your way out of this issue. That's why you need all the stakeholders working together and each playing their own role.
Okay. Shifa, can I come to you? Because we're actually talking about you and your friends and lots of younger children in particular. And, listening to this conversation, I just think you're all under terrible threat all the time with dreadful things happening. But from your point of view, what's this about and what are the issues?
Well, I suppose I'm very lucky to say, thanks to my work with WebWise and just kind of my knowledge in general, I haven't been involved in anything negative online, but I know it does exist. And I wanted to get involved with WebWise because I know that I haven't known a world without the internet, and I know me and my peers are growing up in a world with the internet, and I want to be able to help everyone, and I can see these issues firsthand, and I kind of understand it, and I just want to be able to help and make that change for the future. And I suppose we use WebWise, we meet together to make a lot of different resources for parents, for teachers, for people my age, for people younger than me. It's just, I think it's really important that everyone gets a say in together, and I think it's important for young people to kind of know who they can go to. I suppose a big thing is if they have been involved with anything negative online, they may feel guilt or embarrassment because of this, so they mightn't be inclined to go to their parents, but it's important that they know that you don't have to necessarily go to your parent or guardian. You can go to older brother or sister that you're very close to, maybe your grandparent, a teacher, anyone at all. So I'm very interested in internet safety because I know it is the way of the future, and I want to be able to help.
Okay, thanks for that, Chief. I'll come back to you in a minute, but Anya, maybe from the parents' side of this, knowing that all these dreadful things are going on as soon as the bedroom door is closed and they've disappeared in with their smartphone or their computer, ban it? Ban all this technology? What's the Parents' Council's perspective?
Yeah, and I think
on this?
understandably sometimes that is what parents feel maybe they need to do is, if it's that much of a risk, then let's get rid of it and get rid of the risk in that respect. And I think listening to the other panel members, you're hearing from I suppose, as you say, the cutting edge of risk, and then you're hearing a young person who said they haven't come across any of that. And I think that really illustrates the balance that we have to get here. And in working with parents and talking to parents, I suppose just to give a little bit of a context of what we do, we have a helpline for parents for all sorts of different issues, but we do take calls from parents who have concerns around their child's internet safety, and we also do training sessions in schools. And we've met over 12,000 parents through those sessions over the last number of years. So we're hearing from them on a regular basis over a period of time of the types of things that are concerning them. And I think a lot of what's happening, and Tanya's alluded to this as well, is the fact that they're parenting, listening to it from a risk perspective nearly all of the time. They're always hearing the news stories about where something has gone badly wrong. And they're feeling that they're parenting within a vacuum because they feel that they don't have the skills and knowledge to parent around this. And I think that's where we're falling down maybe in terms of parents understanding that all of the skills that they have around parenting equally apply to the technology world as well. And I think when we start to have discussions like that with parents and young people, they start to understand that maybe this isn't so different. And I suppose it also has been touched on earlier with water safety, but we'd have to make an analogy with road safety as well. We know that children die every year on the roads. If parents were told they had to keep their children off the roads because of that until they were 16, there would be an outcry. So that, I think, illustrates the sense of children's rights to experience the world around them, and I think that has to be very, very much protected online as well, and that we have to balance that sense of risk and protection with their sense of we're expecting children and young people to live in this digital world. We're now getting smart homes. Everything we're doing is requiring technology and internet access. And we know from child development that the younger we engage with children around skills, around developing values, around managing and navigating society, the earlier we start with children, the better equipped they're going to be. And I think the other thing that often when we're talking about that, well, should we just take children away from the internet and then they'll be safe? We've a lot to learn from the real world in terms of the online world. We've never managed, through all the legislation, through all the parenting, through everything else, we've never managed to fully protect children in the real world. So I think we need to take a lot of what we're looking for within the day-to-day lives of children and parents and apply that. And one of the things that we know is that when children are harmed, either on the online world or the real world, the harm often comes from their feeling that they can't tell anybody. And I think sometimes that comes through the messages we give young people and the mixed messages we give young people. And I make the analogy that makes me sound very old now, but when I was growing up, girls were often told, don't come home here pregnant. Now, it was the last thing parents actually meant. They didn't want their child not to feel that they could go to them if they were in difficulty, but there was almost this kind of this threat that, this is the worst thing you can possibly do. So I think parents need to be very careful about the messages they're giving that are managing their own fears for their children, which are natural fears and natural protection feelings. But we know that children who find themselves in real difficulty don't tell somebody, and we need to find ways to help children tell. And I think even some of the messages we hear going out to children, don't talk to strangers online. Now, I don't know anymore what that means, Because last night, again, this might make me sound a little bit dated, but I was playing Words with Friends. Okay, I was playing with 2 people in America and I think 1 person in the UK. I don't know them. They're strangers to me. But I play that most evenings. It's a pass. And we know that young people play FIFA with people in China and Canada and all. So when we're saying to children, don't talk to people online you don't know, what does that mean? And then when the child gets into difficulty and all they've heard is don't talk to strangers, well, how do they come back from that? How do they come to their parent or to their teacher or to anybody who has continuously said to them, don't do this? They now find themselves in difficulty. How do they go and talk to somebody about that? So I think we need to be really, really careful about the conversations we're having with children. And we need to be, and this has been said across the panel already, we need to be listening more than we're telling. And we need to negotiate, I think, rules and ways of working with the internet and understand that adults know something about the internet, and children often know very different things about the internet. So when we started working in this area, we would have heard very much from adults that their children know so much more than them about anything to do with the internet. That's changing. We're hearing now parents saying that they feel that they know as much, if not more, than their children, but they know different things. And I think that's where some of the difficulties are arising.
Okay, thanks for that, Anya. Ryan, Google.
Sure.
You invented this problem.
Oh, did we? Okay.
What are you doing about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm delighted to be here and to talk about Google's approach to safety. I think share a very strong common cause with everyone here in that what we want is for people to have a positive experience when they go online, whether they're young or old. And that cuts across online safety, privacy, security, a whole range of issues. And just maybe talk a little bit about how we approach the issue of online safety and the different elements that we see from Google's point of view. And the 3 sort of main themes are education and empowerment, technological innovation, and then working in partnership. So I think they tie up with what's been said already, and hopefully they may offer some food for thought for later. In terms of education and empowerment, I mean, that's been raised as one of the key themes for today. On Google and YouTube, obviously we want people to be empowered to take action if they see something inappropriate. So we have tools that allow people to report inappropriate content, and we have community policies that are enforced 24/7 by teams of people working around the world. Shortly, we're going to be expanding our transparency in that area because I think people do need a bit more feedback in terms of, well, what's happening when I report content online. So again, as a way of empowering users, we're launching a transparency report which will allow people to see, well, what action have we taken, what process have we applied. But I mean, the broader field of education is very important to us as well. We have a number of programs. And obviously we have a sort of fat folder here of different initiatives that are happening, but sort of Google's contribution is in a number of areas. We recently launched in Ireland Be Internet Legends, which is a program that can be run in schools online and offline for children between the ages of 7 and 11. But it has a kind of a nice sort of take-home aspect to it, and there's an online game that children can play with their parents or can work through with their parents, because I think often, I know only if you find this sometimes, you know, your children don't always bring back everything that they learn in school and kind of bring you into the loop. I know from my point of view, my kids often give me a very partial account of what they've learned in school, but I think it is important that there's some opportunity for parents to kind of engage with what's on the curriculum. We also have online training for teachers to help them navigate the area of digital citizenship. And we recently ran an online safety symposium with the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals about how that can be of assistance to teachers. So those are some of the things we do in Ireland. We push it out through school talks and so on. I think another important aspect of this, and maybe something that might have general application, is using the platforms themselves as a form of education. Because obviously if the platforms are what kids are using. So if young people are on YouTube, they're engaging with creators who are putting up the content they want to see. We have a program called Creators for Change, which actually brings those creators in to kind of actually help with the education of the young people who are using the platform. I think that's a very useful model. So that's the education empowerment side. Obviously, as a tech company, we look at this through the lens of what innovations can we apply that will actually be of assistance. And we've been thinking about this, for years, ever since we've been in existence. But we recently launched in Ireland Family Link, which is a opportunity for parents to create an account for their child that allows them to use the internet and use the different online services, but where the parent is in control. So the parent can set the ground rules in terms of a whole range of things, what apps can be used, when they can be used, set a sort of digital bedtime for children and so on. And it really allows parents and children and families to work out, well, what are the ways we want to use this resource here, because I think, as many people have said, the opportunities online are huge for people of all age. Just speaking from YouTube, the number of hours of sort of educational material that's watched now is just stratospheric, and it's something that people use YouTube for, more than many other things. So other tech tools like we have YouTube Kids, safe search on Google search, so people can be protected from inappropriate content. So we would see our role under that pillar as, as the tech company, providing the tools that are going to help parents, educators, and experts in this field to actually create a safer environment. And the third element then is partnerships, and this is hugely important because I think, as we said at the outset, this is a huge challenge for everybody. No one company, no one NGO is ever going to come up with the overall solution here. So we're very focused on working in partnerships, and we do have a lot of that at EU level. We're members of the Alliance for Better Protection of Minors Online, the ICT Coalition for Children Online. In Ireland, we're a member of Hotline.ie, so we support their work in providing a route for reporting of illegal content. And we are involved also sort of in industry-wide initiatives on the illegal content side to make sure that we're staying one step ahead of perpetrators. We have a sort of a sharing of identifiers of material that may be circulating around on the web, and we're able to kind of make sure that if it's detected on our platform, that other industry bodies get it as well. So those are kind of the three pillars, and maybe just kind of to generalize it a little bit, three things that may be worth looking at today. How do we empower parents and children? How do we make sure there's innovation in technology so that as new problems and controversies are identified, that there are the tools available there that can address it? And then how do we ensure that we have really strong, solid partnerships with all the right experts, all the right interest groups, all the right industry bodies that are working day by day to address the issue?
Can I just pose one question to you, maybe? Because you are the organisations that actually invent the things, you create the apps and the...
Not personally.
you create in the industry a lot of the things that then become the medium that can be abused. What do you think is the biggest responsibility in that regard for the industry, in terms of not addressing the bad things when they've happened, but actually helping to stop them happening?
So I think that we have, I suppose we do benefit from having, we're a young company, from 20 years, less than 20 years old, I think, but, in internet terms, we're there at the start, I suppose, or close to the start. So we do benefit from, that experience and so on, and also the technological innovation. But I think it does, as Anna said earlier, it is moving to the stage of trying to stay one step ahead now of what the next thing is. So, and we're increasingly using technology for that challenge. So in cases like illegal content, such as violent extremist content and so on, we're now increasingly using machine learning. So this is the kind of the cutting edge of technological research being applied to identify material that shouldn't be on our platform. And I think at this stage now, 98% of the material we remove under that category has been flagged by a algorithm that we've developed. But I think we also still maintain the importance of human review. So we have teams of human reviewers who take final decision on these takedowns. Okay. And I think that is important to maintain.
Real people.
Real people, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask Shifra just to comment before I close this session, because I know people really want to get talking about these issues at the tables. So Shifra, this session is a kind of a first open discussion of this nature, and it's about trying to create a long-term plan that would improve things, and obviously the beneficiaries are going to be people of your generation in particular. What would you say to everybody here that they should try and do that would be really valuable for young people and younger children particularly?
Well, I think the main thing is when you're kind of deciding how to go forward and putting plans in places to keep everybody in mind. The internet is for everyone, and to keep in mind that the young people that you're educating are going to be using it in future. So it's kind of to just be aware that everyone should maybe be brought up on the same level. Nobody should be told that they don't know as much, or nobody should be thinking, maybe a parent or a teacher shouldn't be telling a younger child or student that I know more than you and you're not right. So just kind of everyone's on the one level and we're learning together and we're going forward together, and just kind of keep everyone on the same level together.
Okay, thanks, Shifa. And because I'm a big softie when it comes to facilitation, Tanya wanted to get a last word.
Just one last word. I suppose we've talked a lot about, education for children and young people and for parents. And I suppose it's really important in that not to let industry off the hook as well. And it's great to hear Google is doing so much. But there's actually a lot more that industry could be doing actually to protect children's data and to protect children and young people from harm. So why are we giving over our data to them at all to be marketed and exploited for commercial purposes? Why can't we say, no, you can't have the data or exploit the data until someone reaches the age of 16? Of course, there are complaints mechanisms at the moment in some of the platforms, but we know some of them have been slow to take down offensive material. So we do need to think about a digital safety commissioner. The government is committed to that. Think about what powers that digital safety commissioner should have to protect children and young people online. And just one of the other things I think to think about is how children and young people can harm each other online as well, and what are the solutions in relation to that. We talked about some children have sent images of other children to each other, potentially being liable for a very serious criminal offence. Children are harming each other in terms of bullying each other, harassing each other sometimes, or oversharing. What kind of measures do we need to put in place to try and minimise those kinds of events in children and young people and educate them? But what should the Digital Safety Commissioner do in relation to that as well? So just some of the questions I think to think about. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. Okay, so plenty of food for thought there. So I'm going to say thank you very much to this first panel. And is Minister Stanton? He is. Excellent. I thought for a moment I was going to have to transmogrify myself. So while we're moving into session 2, can I introduce Minister David Stanton? He's the Minister for Equality, Immigration and Integration at the Department of Justice.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Okay, that's fine. It's been a long morning. I'm very happy to be here this morning to stand in for Minister Flanagan, who obviously can't be here due to other business. As a lot of you know, today's event comes at a time when there's been a lot of activity and discussions in relation to the whole area of online safety, following on from a particularly disturbing case dealt with in the criminal courts last month. That, of course, is not to say that there's not been a lot of activity in the area in recent years. Much has happened, and you've been given a good sense of the breadth of cross-cutting activity that is taking place at government department level from the whole of government video played earlier in the morning. And Minister Naughton's introduction and the Taoiseach's open address also give a flavour. And you've also been given a perspective from the European Commission. There have been developments at Commission level as recently as last week with the publication of the Commission's recommendation incorporating operational measures to effectively tackle illegal content online. The recommendation, which is directed at companies and member states, applies to all forms of illegal content online, ranging from terrorist content, child sex abuse material, incitement to hatred and violence, counterfeit products and copyright infringement. It is part of an ongoing and concerted drive to ensure that illegal content online is detected swiftly and removed. You have also heard from our first panel, who have been sharing their thoughts on the critically important themes of education and awareness and the respective roles that government and other stakeholders must play to ensure that everybody, particularly children and young people, are safe when they go online. So you have had some cross-sectoral perspectives from representatives of the industry, including in the area of notice and takedown arrangements, child rights and protection advocates, law enforcement, parents and persons concerned with the professional development of teachers in relation to safety on the internet. So there's a lot to reflect on and food for thought in relation to the further actions necessary to be taken to ensure that everybody who uses the internet and other forms of communications technologies are protected from harm while doing so. Having in regard to Minister Flanagan's responsibility for the criminal and legal aspects of internet safety, I know he is particularly interested to hear about any proposals you might have on the need to further strengthen our laws to ensure that children in particular are protected while on the internet. While we have strong laws in place to protect children, there is more that we can do. You have heard about how the government introduced new legislation only last year, the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017, which enabled a number of new offences to be added to the statute book to combat the exploitation of children, and in particular to address the use of modern communication technologies as a tool which may lead to child exploitation. You will also be aware that Minister Flanagan is progressing recommendations for legislative change made by the Law Reform Commission in their 2016 report on harmful communications and digital safety. The Commission has proposed extending some existing offences and creating some new criminal offences, such as extending the existing offence of sending threatening or indecent messages to all online communications, extending the offence of harassment to include all forms of communication, including online or digital communications, creating new offences of stalking and the non-consensual distribution of intimate images with intent to cause harm or distress, generally referred to as revenge pornography, and creating a new offence to address the taking and distribution of intimate images without consent, whether or not there is intent to cause harm or distress. These are, of course, critically important measures to have in place to deal with individuals who use the internet and communications technologies either with the intent to cause harm or who have no regard for the harm their activities might cause. However, this is only part of the landscape, and we have just been listening to a discussion about the importance of preventative measures targeted at ensuring that children and young people, their parents and their educators are sufficiently well informed and aware of the opportunities that modern communication technologies have to offer and how they can be availed of safely. In this context, and in common with a number of other departments, my department has a role in promoting internet safety. The Office of Internet Safety, with its partner bodies Webwise, Childline, and the National Parents Council Primary, and Hotline.ie, provides internet safety awareness raising, helpline and takedown services. As you heard at the outset, the overall aim of today's event is to raise awareness of the activities that are being undertaken by the Irish Government, by the European Commission, by industry and non-governmental organisations. Given the ever-evolving nature of new technologies, addressing online safety will be an online area of concern for all of these sectoral interests, for parents and for children and young people themselves. Accordingly, the Government wants to hear your views and to use the output from this open policy debate to assist with the development of a plan incorporating an integrated set of measures to continue to tackle the issues arising in relation to online safety and to strengthen our capacity to communicate with and to disseminate information to the general public so that children and young people can be supported to stay safe online. I would therefore encourage you to engage in the roundtable discussions that we will move on to next and provide your thoughts on the future steps or the further steps necessary to achieve that aim. And it would be remiss of me as a Minister for State responsible for equality matters not to join in the thoughts of the Taoiseach this morning in marking International Women's Day. And looking around us here at all these august personages looking down at us, I think there's just one woman there. We've come a long way, and she was a queen. We've come a long way, and we've a long way to go yet in that area too. And I wonder what would they make of what we're talking about, the internet and the World Wide Web. We certainly have come a long way. I wish you well in your deliberations, and thank you.
Okay, can I thank Minister Stanton for his input as well. And now we're going to turn our attention very quickly to the breakout sessions. So you're all at tables. What we'd like you to do is to try and make sure that the table has a good mix of people. So if you find that you're all from industry or you're all from the NGO sector, then you need to do a bit of transferring. So there's a 1-minute transfer window going to be open where you can sell each other to other tables and see what prices you can get. The facilitator at each table has a small number of questions. You have to listen to me when I'm talking. That's the deal. The facilitator at each table has 3 questions that are going to be posed to you to keep some focus on the issues. And then at the end of the session, the facilitator will be taking back the key points raised and we'll prepare a presentation, and there'll be feedback after the coffee break. We don't want to constrain the time at the table, so I'm going to suggest we take until 11:20 and then we'll have a coffee break if that's okay with everybody. Can I just remind you, engage, try not to advocate, and try not to get into a row, okay? So enjoy the sessions, move around. There's spaces at tables up at the front in particular, as always. Can I introduce the panel who will be responding in a little while to that feedback? Again, I'm not going to give you chapter and verse on them because you have their bios in the pack that you've got. So we have from Facebook, Niamh Sweeney. We have from the ISPCC, Grania Long. Brian O'Neill, an academic who's well-versed in the research on this area. Anton O'Loughlin from the Digital Rights Ireland, particularly looking at legal advocacy, and from the WebWise Advisory Panel, Cillian Fogarty from Offaly. So as soon as we are ready, what we're going to do is take the feedback by table number. So we had no table 1. So we're going to start with table 2. Is that right, Dulta? Have you got them in that order? Okay, so we're going to start with table 2, and if I could ask the facilitator from table 2 to just quickly take us through the issues that came up at their table, and we'll go around the room fairly quickly, so if I can ask people to be concise. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So our table decided that there were overlaps between some of the issues that weren't discussed and some of the priorities. So one of the issues raised was that it's very difficult to find contact details for complaints or other interactions online. People didn't want necessarily to go to info at, and would there be telephone lines or would there be postal addresses available to make access easier? Speaking to an actual person would be helpful, and trying to navigate through the website to find that individual is very difficult, if not impossible. Another issue is that there's a lot of agencies who overlap with some of the work that they do. Some aren't all connected, and so a joint-up agency to take ownership is required. An issue came up that addiction from overuse of technology exposes users to biochemical addictive disorders. Is that right? Disorder is probably too strong, but that it can be very addictive, and that the addiction component probably needs to be prioritized. Then we came up with our priorities. So the first one is legislation, that the law reform report suggested that a commissioner was needed, somebody who had power, and that a collaborative approach by creating a single agency similar to the RSA for roads should be developed. Access was the second priority, that an age limit for accessing internet unsupervised, defining access as broad, so there would be 3 areas: digital consent, ownership of device, and other access. And then again, the third priority there is screen time guidelines, which would mean that there should be guidelines and a national consensus as to maybe how long individuals should spend online. Did I cover everything?
Okay, thank you. Everybody clear from that table about that's the feedback? Yeah, happy with that? Okay, table 3.
Okay, how are you doing? So we had quite a broad-ranging conversation, but just the main, I guess, issue that they felt probably wasn't covered so well in the first panel was the Digital Safety Commissioner. There was a kind of a divide in the table, I guess, between the kind of coercive measures and the statutory power embodied in such a role and versus self-regulation of industry. And I guess some members were kind of wondering, how is self-regulation going to be overseen? And would the Digital Safety Commissioner have any role in that? And they would like to know more about what the potential statutory powers of such a commissioner would be, and the role in taking down content. And the point is made that industry, despite the presentations today, industry were not always responsive or as responsive as they should be in taking down illegal content. And then what to do about content that's not illegal, and kind of how can that be handled, how can that be taken down. Also kind of age verification online, both in terms of kind of age of digital consent, but also in examples given of in Germany where there are age controls and the access to pornographic sites, and how is age verification, how is that going to function? And then another major concern, I guess, was the use of children's data, particularly for targeted advertising. And what protection would there be for children in that? Who owns the data that is put up on platforms? And also the point was made about the need to prioritize harassment legislation, which is on the books, I believe, in stalking legislations. So again, the main priority then was, for a lot of people, wasn't getting a digital safety commissioner to have them a role in that. And a big part of the conversation as well is about education, the importance of peer education, particularly given that digital norms culturally are very different intergenerationally, and that peers be far more effective at educating children, and perhaps children younger than them as well. And then finally, in terms of points made in regulating industry rather than coercive measures, perhaps the establishment of cultural norms for industry as well can be very effective in getting them to respond to the inappropriate content, etc.
Okay. Everybody happy at that table? Yeah. So we'll move on to table 4.
Thank you very much. At this table, again, we had a very wide-ranging discussion. Some of the items that people felt hadn't been covered earlier was that the issue of internet safety is wider than just children, so that harmful content and these sort of negative items go beyond children. The issue of peer-to-peer and possible criminalisation of young people was also mentioned. The issue of digital marketing and the targeting of particularly minors. And related to that was the role and responsibilities of industry, that while they're very economically important, but that maybe they also need to balance that with adherence to more regulation and greater transparency. Then the issue of government departments and agencies needing to link up and have a more clear allocation of responsibilities. Finally, then, that parenting of children could get a bit lost in the midst of talking about legislation, educating, funding, all the rest of it. One other issue mentioned was the issue of age verification, which I think was also earlier mentioned. Some positives were that there are classes for kids in primary school, and that gives a good foundation when people move into secondary school. The use of digital ambassadors, which are teens talking to younger kids in schools. Also the WebWise Be in Control programme. Improved privacy with the GDPR. And a simple thing, but yet effective, was improvements in default privacy settings were felt to be a positive. Then under question 3, the big one was, again, coordination and coherence in this whole zone to find out who's actually dealing with what and to have proper funding to carry out what was needed. And the other issue was then that it appears that parents don't seem to be an option for kids who come across difficulties on the internet. It's more likely to be teachers in schools, and again, that reflects back on the issue of parenting. Thank you.
Okay, that table happy with that? Thank you very much. Moving on to table 5.
So after much debate about the role of industry and the onus on the individual in relation to making the internet safer, we decided that there is a specific balance of responsibility which should be maintained, although we did not get the opportunity to discuss this to its full extent in the time given, because it's quite a conscientious issue. The need for a centralised area where both parents, students and teachers can access preventative controls and online mechanisms for the protection of children, and we said that WebWise fulfilled this role in that it was centralised, in that it was a comprehensive guide for parents or anybody who was looking for information. And on that, our main point coming from our discussions was the improved dedication of government resources to education in order to prevent rather than react to issues arising, and also dedication of the government resources into creating awareness of support already existing. Yes, and on the topic of education, we sought to define the role of teachers in their part in educating wider society, and we want to emphasise the fact that students are fully capable of administering training to other students and indeed to parents, which is reiterating points already made about peer-to-peer education and in specific relation to the WebWise ambassadors. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Table 5. Table 6.
Okay, so one of the issues that we felt wasn't discussed is with internet safety, we want to frame it as a community issue, not just affecting young people, but in particular other vulnerable groups such as elderly and those who aren't digital natives. So we talked about how can we intervene with this in terms of education and awareness raising. We talked about maybe community centres as examples in other European countries, using mentoring programs, not just peer-to-peer, but asking young people to also mentor elderly or those who are not digital natives to improve their own education in terms of internet use. And another area that we identified was advertising targeting children and the vulnerabilities around that. We wanted to raise awareness again around organisations like Hotline and other educational resources that maybe the general public aren't aware of. I think that's important. In terms of the role and responsibility of industry, we identified personal data sharing. Again, it's been mentioned before, the age of consent. When you sign up to internet service providers, social media, your terms and conditions, how can that be more streamlined effectively so that people will actually consider the terms and conditions when they are signing up to things and not just tick the box to get through to the website. And we want to see a more coordinated approach between sectors. We feel that there is a lot of good work being done, but it can seem or appear to be quite fragmented, so we want a more coordinated approach across all the main stakeholders, not just at national but international, European level as well, because there is a lot of good work being done there already. So just to identify that. So yeah, that's kind of priority for government there. So more focused cross-departmental approach. And just again, for the service providers, the internet companies, how they handle data, that must be addressed in government policy. And again, the education and awareness raising campaigns as well.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, 7. It was zigzag. So table 7.
Thanks. So one of the first things we discussed that wasn't raised in the discussions earlier, there was maybe perhaps too much of a focus on the extreme areas of internet safety. So some areas that we talked about were things like screen time, anxiety, well-being, that we should focus a little bit more on. And maybe perhaps a little lack of focus on the discussions earlier. Also heard about the importance of taking a break from technology and the digital age of consent. We also discussed the ICAG report and seeking clarity on whether recommendations have been implemented from that report. And the Digital Safety Commissioner also came up as an important issue to be discussed. In terms of good initiatives, we heard about Estonia, how they embed cyber safety into their education curriculum as a good example. Wicklow, Corlin and Og also created their own bullying charter as well, which we've seen. And in terms of priorities, it was very strongly felt that it should be one group responsible with a clear focus and a clear action plan. This group would need to be properly resourced, whether it's the Digital Safety Commissioner, something else, or the Office for Internet Safety, who would require additional resources. Definitely education is very important. But we talked about how maybe that might be resourced as maybe teachers, there's not enough resources in education at the minute, so will we need additional resources to come into school and provide programs for schools? Yeah, just like a clear focus strategy. And then we also talked about online advertising for kids
and the digital age of consent again. And we also talked about the difficulties of working with industry as well, in terms of we work with the big players, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and have relationships there, but sometimes those aren't the platforms which cause the problems. So we talked about SimSimi, which we've seen problems with earlier this year, and they don't really look at safety when they're first developed, and they don't really have safety teams. So sometimes they're more the problems as well. So I suppose it's just it's a difficult topic to navigate.
Okay, thank you very much. So table 8.
Thank you. Okay, we had 3 main issues here. One was about adopting a dual approach to addressing issues that are currently there, but also trying to be proactive and anticipating risks and issues into the future. There was another point made around quality proofing, current initiatives, and a question around whether and how they spoke to parents, and a point made around kind of an increase in the trend of seeing the language used with the young people between young people on digital media becoming more image-based. Really good discussion started, but we couldn't, time didn't allow us to pursue it, but around whether parents necessarily do know as much or more than children in the current digital world. Few opinions about, the whole kind of generational gap that may be closed over time, and then other kind of conflicting opinions about, do you ever close generation gaps, and will children and young people always just not be ahead of us in that? No conclusion drawn to that one. Okay, in terms of the priorities then, we identified kind of 3 priority areas, 2 of them which fall under the kind of second priority area already identified on the role of government and industry. And those were around data protection and implications for young people, about a whole debate and kind of back and forward about the lowering of the digital age of consent for young people, and whether it should be or it shouldn't be, while at the same time kind of trying to acknowledge young people's right to information and whatever, but also about a little bit about whether did it really matter an awful lot, because how can it be enforced? That probably sounds flippant. Does it matter an awful lot? Of course it does, but how do you then enforce it after that? Another piece, I think, about the responsibility of industry in terms of the use of data and data regulation, that in the main industry appears to people often to be based on kind of responding to complaints rather than being proactive and kind of preventing harmful information getting out there in the first place. And then I suppose the last point tied into the priority under education and awareness, which was really about early intervention and teaching positive pro-social online behaviours in the digital world to young people. In the same way as teachers work with young people, youth workers work with young people, volunteers work with young people, to build their confidence, to teach them skills and whatever, that we need to adopt the same kind of approach in the digital world. I think that was it.
Okay, thank you very much. Table 8. So on to table 9 then.
Yes, so some samples of what the group felt should have been discussed but wasn't is the LRC report on harmful communications wasn't discussed, and this has a series of valuable recommendations, particularly around the role of the Digital Safety Commissioner. Also, there's a need to distinguish between illegal and legal but potentially harmful behaviour online. There are specific structures in place for illegal behaviour, but the illegal but potentially harmful behaviour is more of a grey area. And an example of that is around cyberbullying. And also there's a need to discuss adults and the dangers they face online rather than only focusing on children. In terms of initiatives that have made the internet a safer place, the broad theme here is really around education and their key messages need to be delivered across the community and include children, parents and educators. Some examples that are the ZECO education programme and WebWise. There's a general need to educate parents so they're empowered to use the internet. Other initiatives are the Safer Internet Day and also some EU initiatives around the Hate Speech Test Terrorism Initiative and ICT Coalition. And finally then, in terms of the priorities for government, it's really around mandatory education in schools on internet safety that engages parents. So the lessons need to be relevant, up to date, based on latest research, adaptive, and also based on the latest tools and apps. But apart from keeping up to date, there are also some basic guiding principles that need to be emphasized regardless of the technological developments. And it should also incorporate an understanding of data processing and how the internet functions, and this can help alleviate suspicion and fear by internet users.
Okay. Thank you, Table 9. Table 10.
Thank you. In relation to issues that we felt needed to be further discussed, one of them is around a national body with responsibility, and that's been mentioned previously as a Digital Safety Commissioner. But part of the reason we felt that that was important is because of the need for that body to have action and to have responsibility in relation to education measures, and also because of the lack of research data and evidence that is both verified and verifiable in this area. We've heard a lot this morning about technology moving ahead, and really there is a dearth of information and data and research in this area that is properly funded and supported. We spent some time talking about the role of the media in informing the debate, and there were some quite strong views in relation to the balance that exists, and also because this is quite a technical area in some cases, often opinion is stated as fact and understood as fact, whereas in fact it is just opinion, and that brought us back to the need for research data and evidence. And then finally, on the positive issues that we felt had an impact, we spoke for some time on the peer-led positive initiatives. We were very inspired by Shifra, who stood up and effectively said, I have not had negative experiences because I am educated and empowered. We felt that was very powerful and really indicated how valuable initiatives like peer-led initiatives, but also initiatives like WebWise and similar could be. Equally, in relation to parental control, education was important, but also measures on devices, and that's part of the role of industry. And then we had, as one other issue that's been very influential, the UK Byron Review, which brings us nicely onto our next point, which priority for government, because that particular piece was about bringing stakeholders together to pool the resources and information and knowledge as to how this should progress, and that's what we feel needs to happen here. We're delighted to see the Minister of State committing to a national plan today. We feel that needs to have defined timescales and responsibilities. We see that as having a council of stakeholders to advise on shaping and delivery, and an oversight group to implement the plan, to review it, and then, as we said, as technology is moving apace, to develop the next plan in tandem, and that it's really important that that piece would have ministerial involvement. And then the second point we had there in our second priority was that there was some discussion this morning, obviously, in relation to the work of the European Commission. We're not facing this difficulty alone. It's important that Ireland both harmonises with other countries in terms of what they're doing, but that the EU overall picture is taken into account. We want to move ahead, but we also need to be cognizant of what's happening elsewhere and feed into that.
Great, that's excellent, thank you. So the next table is...
One of the things that came up for us, I suppose, was that wasn't discussed or raised in the first panel discussion was what do we actually mean when we talk about online safety, and that we feel that that's probably a starting point. But that also as well is that safety can be so broad, and that it shouldn't be, we should look at it from that way, that it, in relation to a children's rights perspective as well, that it needs to have a balance. And again, to echo what Shifra had said, that there is opportunities out there for young people as well, and they should not be restricted. We felt that perhaps the involvement of industry and the good that industry are doing as well wasn't perhaps acknowledged a whole lot in the first part either, while also saying that they can have a bigger role to play as well, but that a lot of initiatives such as hotline.ie are very much supported and strongly supported by industry. And we would question that if that support from industry wasn't there, what could possibly perhaps happen to initiatives like that? Considering that in our response to question 2, that hotline.ie was identified as one of the initiatives that do perhaps make the internet a safer place, along with the resources offered by webwise.ie. In relation to the final question then, of what we felt should be the government's top priority and for consideration, I think it was agreed that a coordinating body of some sort, Digital Safety Commissioner is perhaps the name that's been talked about most this morning, but some kind of coordinating body, but that a thought goes into what the role actually is and that its parameters are clearly defined. Words of like statutory, independent, accountability came up, and they were associated with it also. And not that we're necessarily creating a body that would replace or replicate the good work that's already been done, but that it would coordinate it and it would promote it. And they were the main points that came up for us.
Great, thank you very much. Table 12.
Thank you. We came up again with the digital age of consent, so it's very similar to what other people have spoken about already, but some things that if data is being recorded, that it wouldn't be used for marketing purposes until a child reaches a certain age. We have young people who, while they do want their privacy, and they may not admit it, that they also do want some guidance and boundaries from parents while dealing with issues online. Then we came up that it would be important to have a standalone office for a Minister for Internet or Digital Communication, to have a go-to place where parents and children and young people can go if they have an issue. And then finally, we have the digital footprint. That is it possible that when a child reaches the age of consent, to have that cleaned. And we do know that there are some companies out there at the moment who are doing this, but not necessarily everyone. The initiatives which we found have helped make the internet a safer place. Think before you share, don't be mean behind the screen, Family Link, the Safer Internet Day, and Right to be Forgotten. So question 3, the priorities. Again, education and awareness for everyone from an early age, and that this is normalised. It's also important to define the difference between harmful content versus illegal content. The second issue would be sexual abuse online. And our third one then is the fear that if something was criminalised, that may put a fear into young people to actually disclose that they have done something wrong, like posting a picture of themselves on one of the social media sites.
Great, thank you. So, to table 13.
Our table actually spoke about a number of issues. With regard to the initiatives, they wanted to speak about safety net. They said this is a partnership between NGOs, industry and government, and it protects women and children online. They also spoke about a code of conduct on illegal hate speech. They found this was a great initiative. The Department of Education apparently has provided funding for parents' education. It's an online safety workshops that they ran, I think it was with the National Parents Council, and they found this was a super initiative that was run by the Department of Education. Another initiative that was mentioned by our group was Communications for All 2017, and this was run by UNESCO and some Turkish sector. With regard to question 3, we actually covered quite a lot of issues that we found very, very important, but the main one was actually the formal footing in the school's curriculum. The group felt that a digital citizenship education should be integrated into our formal education system. This was discussed at length, and this was the point that the group wanted to make as their priority. But they also have spoken about a couple of other ones which they would also like to bring to your attention. The Digital Safety Commissioner, it was mentioned by some in the group there that it should have a coordinator's role as opposed to enforcement. Also, with regard to safety online, it's not just for children. Danger is not just for strangers. It can be from those that we know. Domestic violence should factor in the action plan, maximising safety for victims of domestic violence. The scope and mapping of the action plan needs more clarity. The group felt strongly about that. They felt that it sort of lacked definition, and it was so overarching and broad. They felt that the scope and mapping should be clearly clarified. Also, what was discussed at the group was, at EU level alignment, how this interacts with the EU framework and how this can be fed into it. And they were our group's findings.
Great, thank you very much. So table 14.
Hiya. Yeah, we echoed a lot of the issues that were already raised here. One of the things that on the education side, that parents are modelling good behaviour and limiting their own device use at home in front of their children, and that education is focused on building core life skills, I suppose, in kids, that it's not just in a digital arena. Technology was another issue that was raised in terms of using age verification to trigger restrictions or safeguards. And I suppose also things like just-in-time notifications or pop-up notifications in terms of before posting certain material. And then also in terms of GDPR, the transparency obligations that are coming down the line for industry. So that was raised as a topic to explore as well. In terms of some of the best practice, I suppose, that we could learn from, one of the members raised the UK Ofsted process of assessing schools in terms of e-safety. And then also in the UK, their internet safety strategy, which is at green paper stage, I think, at the moment, and the Digital Safety Commissioner model in Australia as well. So then in terms of the priorities, we just kind of looked at this under 3 key areas. So leadership, obviously this is looking at where the responsibility sits, and if that was Digital Safety Commissioner, ensuring that it's properly resourced and also properly mandated, so that things like education could come under its purview as well. Education, I think, again, echoing what a lot of people have said here, peer learning being hugely important, and youth advocates and ambassadors. The idea of education becoming an extension of things like sex education or mental health awareness, that it's not just about kind of digital safety, that it's about kind of equipping young people with the life skills and the, I suppose, kind of confidence, the ability to self-regulate their own kind of internet use and their own kind of ways of behaving online. For parents, I suppose it's educating them around kind of what is and isn't appropriate content, because obviously we've talked a lot about the different grey areas, but also parents have a huge responsibility not to use kind of devices as, I suppose, a way to just kind of let kids off with them, and that there's a real sense that parents need to have more oversight and engagement in terms of digital use. And then strategy, I think, again, this brings in the idea of the Digital Safety Commissioner, and also an early collaboration with all stakeholders to ensure that that strategy is as partnership focused as possible. Again, like other tables, there was discussion around an authority like the Road Safety Authority to lead on this in terms of strategy. And one thing that was referenced was the success of the Road Safety Authority's media campaign. So a very kind of clear and concise media campaign that could go a long way towards, I suppose, safeguarding against issues. I suppose across all of those areas in terms of priorities, the idea of investment and resourcing was highlighted as a strong need.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. And table 15, I think this is the final table.
So our table talked a lot about, there maybe wasn't as much discussion on the positive aspects, and that equal focus should be given to this and how we can harness these to help tackle this issue. A forward-looking agenda, so we should look to the future, particularly how the digital ecosystem may evolve and how the steps that we take today may impact or interact with that. As well as that, we were talking about the role of the role and remit of the Digital Safety Commissioner and how that needs to be defined clearly. Education and coordinated effort came up as a big issue. So how to reach the hard to access groups, that information education is key, but is currently delivered in a fragmented manner, that there's appetite for learning, but a more coordinated effort would help to disseminate this information in a more effective way. And then in terms of our priorities, a more structured approach, so that includes all stakeholders in a practical way with identified outcomes. So similarly, that would echo a lot of what has already been said from the other tables. A focus on schools and children as a key area for action. So this is one of the areas that can have real impact if it's invested in. And a prioritization of effort. So just to make sure there is limited resources, make sure that we're making the right decisions and investing our effort and attention in the areas that will pay dividends.
Okay. Right, thank you very much, everybody. That's a lot to absorb, panel. And now I'm going to ask each of you to just reflect on what you've heard and perhaps to put a little bit of structure on it, perhaps to talk a little bit about what you've heard that is hopeful in terms of the task that has been set, and maybe some of the things that came up that either you feel need to be developed or perhaps are striking you as interesting. You hadn't thought of that, those kinds of things. So I'm going to start with Brian, if I can, and I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Certainly it is a challenge because a very comprehensive overview. I think exactly as would be hoped for by bringing together gatherings such as we have today, representing right across the spectrum. So really, really valuable ideas. In terms of hope and messages that we can see coming through, I think I should start by welcoming the event itself, the nature of the debate, and the openness to have such wide representation and input, and in terms of absolutely applauding the effort and the Minister for taking leadership on this, and welcoming the words of Taoiseach this morning. That certainly, I think, was a real signal, message of hope that there is a commitment to developing an action plan and a timeline associated with that, because we've debated many of these issues long and hard. And graphs for a range of different solutions. And I think it is time, to fill that gap that we haven't necessarily followed through and had consistent thinking, or indeed echoing the words that I've heard right across almost every table: coordination and coherence. There is definitely a call, I think, from the wider community represented here today, that there is definitely time now to build that coherence and coordination. So I certainly see that as certainly a clear message coming through. There is certainly a wide recognition as well in terms of the underlying complexity around this. And I was really glad to hear the final comments from Table 15. That it isn't necessary to focus on what are the symptoms, where problems do arise, and we are brought together sometimes in reaction to serious events and harms that affect young people. But we have to look at this in the round. And assess how we are approaching and supporting the whole wide opportunities afforded to young people. A phrase I often use that children really do have a rightful place in the information society, and that has been the underpinning of European policy for over 2 decades, and all of our efforts should be focused around ensuring support for that rightful place. And so a lot of mention in terms of the specific education initiatives that need to happen. They need to evolve in time because the opportunities for learning and digital technologies in schools need to be adapted according to what benefits they can bring for young people. Crucially as well, because we are necessarily concerned with issues around protection and protection against evident harms that can affect young people, that it is also part of wider provision. And that children have rights, they are digital citizens, and a focus on digital citizenship brings that into the round as well. So what that may mean for education, and I'm certain that it does have implications for curriculum, for resources for teachers, finding that right place for that, and the benefits that will have across our whole education system. Our digital champion, Lord Putnam, has never been slow to bring forward that message, and I think it's sort of call us sort of reckoning it. Where are we in terms of our thinking, ensuring that young people are absolutely prepared to gain everything that they possibly can from the information society. So I think that there's echoes of that that I've certainly responded to in terms of what we're hearing here. But a very big message, and much talk around proposals made by the Law Reform Commission. I chaired the Internet Content and Governance Advisory Group. We were members here today. So I think all of us who've contributed to the policy debates in recent years are anxious to know where they stand, and are we contributing to a better, more consistent approach for the entire community. It is a multi-stakeholder community, and that is certainly an approach I would support and endorse. I've heard lots of those echoes here, and I think there's a lot of hope in those.
Great, thank you, Brian. I'm just going to come along the table if that's okay. So Killian, off you go.
Yeah, well, I think one of the main things that kind of came up with everyone was collaboration, where there's a lot of different agencies out there, but there's no one overriding organization over all of them. It's like there's no real one way to solve this problem. It's not a cookie cutter frame. You have to work for different solutions to find maybe one solution won't work. You need 4 or 5 different solutions for different age groups, different types of media, ranging from photo sharing to then messaging sites, or even gameplay. They're now being a lot more involved in internet and people communicating and then meeting up afterwards. And there's a lot of work being done in policies for parents kind of being in control of the students, or in control of the children, and trying to block out apps or internet access. But really, it should be more about education, where the parents are teaching the children about how to stay safe online themselves. Because if you just block it from them, children are quite smart. They'll find a way around you blocking an app or closing off the internet access. So you need to teach them to be able to manage themselves in internet safety.
Okay, great, thank you. Anton.
It's just been great to be here and hear all the different views from everybody, and to hear young people at the table as well. it's important to bring it forward as well that although there are risks, mainly these are great opportunities for children, and the research, it's worth looking at the Livingston research, the EU Kids research, that that children get a lot out of being online, and they get a lot of advantage from it, and it gives them outlets of all sorts that they might not have had otherwise. And our job is to minimise the risk. We, the adults in the room, that's our job, is to minimise the risk for them as they get all of these opportunities. And our problem, I suppose, in a large part, as we discuss all these things, is that we're dealing with a sophisticated group. Children are and other vulnerable people as well. Children are a sophisticated group, but unfortunately, they're not as sophisticated as they think they are. And that might be true for us as well as a society. We don't know. We believe we understand the topics, or we have a little bit too much confidence in our own understanding of the topics. And I think that we have to be very aware that there are unknowns in the future, that we don't know where the next risk is going to come. For example, the whole issue of sexting and revenge porn. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that there would be a detective sergeant at this table telling us that a big problem he had was children sending nude images and so on to one another and then being passed on. Who would have thought that would have been the problem? So we have to put a lot more effort into, I think, anticipating the future. And one place I could see the problems of the future coming from our point of view at Digital Rights Ireland is in terms of databases. That we're solving problems by building databases, like age verification databases of children and so on. But do we have real control over these databases to make sure they're not exploited in a negative way? And that's in one place is in the commercial sphere, and the other is also in the government and the public sector sphere, that we're connecting up all of these databases, but maybe we could be creating as many problems as we are solving. And I would also say we're doing a lot in terms of education, dealing with sexting and all of these things. All the different people are doing, putting out materials and so on. But the question I would ask, are we doing it? We're doing a lot of good initiatives, but are we doing a lot of enough good quality initiatives? Is the material really good quality? Is it convincing? Is it engaging with the sophisticated audience? And I would say we're, because of coordination issues and probably resource issues, I'd be very concerned that, at the policing level, do we actually have enough resources to do all the things that need to be done, and are they being dealt with at the right level in the community? Is the Garda always the appropriate resource, and so on? And also in terms of how we handle data in these agencies, because sensitive data about vulnerable children is the most sensitive data of all, and are we doing a good job at protecting that data? And you just can't leave a thing like what happened in terms of the McCabe case with files relating to the children. You can't put that aside. That's a really big issue that has to be dealt with. Are we dealing with this information and doing the work well enough at a sufficient level of quality? So I would say that those things could be roles for the Digital Safety Commissioner. In terms of looking at the quality of these initiatives, are we really doing a good job on all of these initiatives and trying to anticipate the future, try to look beyond just the immediate threats into what's going on further down the road. And another thing that came for me, and is the role of parents, and we just have to go back to this role of parents again, because I don't know, and maybe it's an education problem or maybe it's a too busy problem, but we do have to remember that services like Facebook and Twitter, these are adult services. They're intended for adults. It is, if children use them, that's great, but if parents are aware of it, they're going to have to manage that and deal with that and think about whether that's appropriate, for their children. And they have to take their full responsibility, and that is our position as well in this country. The way our constitution works, the rearing of children is primarily the role of the parents, and they have to play the full role, and they have to be facilitated in that and have the resources they need. But they are the key people in the equation.
Thank you very much, Grania.
Okay, well, I'm feeling very optimistic, actually, ironically, given that this is the child protection issue of our time. And in many ways, I've been waiting for today for a long time, because I think it's probably 15 years ago when we got the first call into Childline that felt like a call around cyberbullying, but of course we didn't call it cyberbullying back then. And it's probably about 10 years ago when we got the first set of calls into Childline where we felt there was a trend whereby young people were beginning to send intimate images of themselves to each other. And that's 10 years ago. And we've been talking about this. And most importantly, we've been listening to children telling us about this for 10 years. So today is a big day, and it's a big day for a lot of reasons. And in a way, it's a big day because I think there's a collective view in this room that this is not a problem that's too big to solve. But sometimes when you listen to the public debate on this issue, it's presented as a problem that's too big to solve. And I think we need to step back from that. So from that point of view, I'm really pleased. I'm delighted the Minister's announced an action plan, because that is what we need now. We need coordinated action. We need resources mapped against that. We need a plan, a strategy that looks and feels like a set of actions that we need to resolve. And I would look to the UK and the Byron review that was done actually 10 years ago. And one of the really strong outcomes that came from that was the establishment of the UK Council on Child Internet Safety. And it was basically this room. It was pretty much the sister organisations of all of the organisations. So the NSPCC was there, the state organisations, independent organisations, organisations that provide services to children, all came together and agreed that they would set themselves as a council a plan, and they put very clear actions against it. Now, it's not a perfect process, so I'm sure there would be people who would say, well, we could have done this better or that better. But the point is, my ask today of the Minister, who asked for ideas, Minister Stanton and other ministers, is I think we should take today, and I think we should use that to form an Irish version of the Council for Child Internet Safety, and it should inform the basis of that plan, and we should hold ourselves collectively responsible. And I just want to mention the three key groups that have come up quite a bit today, and rightly so. One, the state; one, industry, and I have a view on the word industry, which I'll come back to, and the third is parents and children themselves. The state has a proactive duty in Ireland to protect children, and this is the key child protection issue. So everything the state does has to be proactive, and it has to plan its role. And I heard Declan Daly this morning from on Garda Síochána, and I have no question, and I actually absolutely take your point actually, who would have thought that this would be taking up so much of the Garda's time?
Well, you knew, but
we
didn't
did.
know.
Well, actually, children did. Children were telling us indirectly, and we were listening. But the Garda Inspector report came out last week, and it said the Gardaí do not have the resources they need. So we need to take that really seriously, because it's not enough to say, oh, this is a big issue, and not then put the resources in. And Gardaí don't have the powers that they need. They should have powers akin to the powers that they have under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So if I'm driving my car and a guard thinks I'm under the influence, they can seize my car without a warrant and they can search it. They can't do that right now in relation to a phone. We have to address those issues. So I'm delighted that ministers are saying there will be an action plan. I'm delighted that ministers are saying we will take action. But the state itself has to take action. It cannot delegate its responsibilities. I'll come on briefly to the point about industry. I think we need to be really careful when we use the word industry, because industry is massive and it's big, and there's a whole range of different types of organisations, and I include the ISPCC in that. We provide services to children. From May of this year, we will have to undertake a risk assessment in relation to the data that we capture on children. So will every organisation in Ireland, so it's not just industry. And I think the GDPR creates incredible protections for young people. But the big worry that I have right now is, are we resourcing our Data Protection Commissioner sufficiently? Because it's not going to be about the powers that people have and the responsibilities, because that's written in law and that's come from the Commission. Have we given our own National Commissioner sufficient powers and authority to enforce these really important protections? Because it's flipping how we treat children's data on its head in a really positive way. And we've had a lot of focus on the digital age of consent, and I can understand why, and rightly so, but the real focus needs to be on, we are now creating positive obligations on organisations to assess risks to children themselves. If they don't do that, who will hold them to account? And our Data Protection Commissioner has not published guidance for people on children and the GDPR. The UK Commissioner has done that. The consultation process is closed. And I was able to go online a few days ago as a CEO and read, ironically, the UK guidance. And I now know what I need to make sure my organisation is doing. Our DPA, our National Office, our Digital Protection Commissioner, should have that work done. It should have been in place by now, so it now needs to happen. So there's a lot that the state needs to do. There's a lot of that industry, that independent organisations. And my final point, and I'll stop then, is parents. Thank you very much, Anya Lynch, if she's still here, for what you said this morning, because it was so important to get that message, that parents have a legal role, a legal obligation to parent, but actually, when I listen to parents, and they ring the ISPCC all the time, really worried about this because they've listened to yet another radio program where somebody's on talking about this as the biggest single problem facing children. What we explain to parents is you have a lot more knowledge of this issue than you ever think you are, and the relationship that you have with your child is the thing that will make the difference. So it's not necessarily about their knowledge of technology. Yes, will it make a difference? Of course it will, but really it's about the relationship you have with your child. So that's I think what we need to keep stressing here, is that parents know a lot more than they do. They're a lot better equipped. But look, the point is, Siofra put it really well, you've put it incredibly well. Young people need to be listened to in this debate. And I echo what Anya said about we need to listen more rather than tell. And that's what we've learned 15 years of listening in Childline. Children are telling us what we need to hear. It's whether we listen and whether we put the resources in when we define the problem.
Thanks, Grania. And finally, Niamh.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Minister Naughton and all the ministers involved in this initiative for inviting us to be here today, and indeed to Gail Kent for coming across, because obviously we're very involved in all of the initiatives that the Commission is leading on as well. Before I try and address some of the issues raised, I'd just like to say Facebook has a huge responsibility when it comes to the safety and security of the people that use our service, and we fully recognise that, and it's especially acute when it comes to young people. So these are issues we've been thinking about for a long time. We try and address them across a number of ways, and those techniques and approaches have been refined and developed over the 14 years, which is all we've been around for. And we're still trying to get it right. You know, enforcement is difficult around the full range of issues that have been raised here today. And, you know, we're still working hard to get the approach fully right. I'm joined here today by a couple of my colleagues, one of whom is Tim Fagan, who's down there. He leads our law enforcement response team. So that is something I really wanted to get across today, because I know one of the biggest issues people are concerned about is child safety in its most critical sense. And there's been a lot of talk about coordination and collaboration, and Tim leads a team that is based here in Dublin and works very closely with An Garda Síochána and Declan in particular, and law enforcement right across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. We're part of a global coordinated approach to dealing with child exploitation. That global approach is led by NCMEC, which is the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US. So we liaise very closely with NCMEC, and NCMEC liaise very closely with the Gardaí, and then when the time is right, we liaise very closely with the Gardaí as well. So I want to reassure people on that front. There is a very sophisticated, coordinated approach when it comes to that kind of coordination. There's no place on our platform or any of the platforms for that kind of material. So that's something I'd really like to reassure people on. One of the ways we try and address that issue ourselves is through the use of technology. We use photo matching technology that was developed by Microsoft called PhotoDNA, which helps us to prevent, well, essentially the re-victimization of a lot of people through we can prevent the resharing of content that has been identified as illegal, and that can include non-consensually shared intimate images, more commonly known as revenge porn, and child exploitation imagery. The technology is developing all the time. I think there's a sense that some people have maybe that it can do more than it can. The CEO of my own company said about a year ago, when he wrote a 6,000-word thought piece, which I'm sure you all absorbed in great detail, that you know, artificial intelligence is going to play an increasingly important role. It already is around things like terrorism and how we detect that kind of content. But there's still a long way to go, and we're continually working on it. So technology is just one piece of the puzzle for us. Policies are a very important piece of the puzzle for us as well. And over the last 14 years, we've developed a very, I suppose, intricate set of policies. And actually in April, we're going to start sharing more information about how they work, because you know, we're trying to introduce more transparency around that and to help people understand how we approach it. We've also built one of the world's most sophisticated reporting infrastructures, so that, as Table 1 pointed out, people can reach us when they need to highlight some sort of abuse that's taking place on our system. And that, you know, it gets channeled according to the type of problem you're trying to identify. So that can be bullying, it can be defamation, it can be a violation of your privacy rights, you know, it can be non-consensual sharing of intimate images. And actually that's something, while we're here today, because I forget sometimes, people don't often know, if you know somebody who is being threatened with the sharing of an intimate image or it's already happened, you can contact us and we've created a database to prevent, using that same photo matching technology to prevent the resharing of it. We can literally stop it from being uploaded. And I think often when people find themselves in that situation, there's huge fear and panic around it, and they don't understand they can reach out to us and others. So I'd encourage people to do that. So that reporting infrastructure is very important, and we continue to build on that. And as Gail pointed out earlier on, the Commission has made asks of us to make it more sophisticated and more responsive to particular types of content. So we're working on that all the time. I might just address a few of the other issues that were, and obviously, sorry, as Ryan mentioned, we really value partnerships. We consult a lot with safety organisations all around the world. We invest in safety-led materials, education that happens within the app, and that's particularly relevant for teens. They would experience any under 18s on our platform, and under 18 must be 13 or over as well, obviously. They receive in-app education that an over 18 user of the app wouldn't, particularly around safety, privacy, who you're sharing with, what you're sharing. And there are various different technical solutions operating in the background as well there. We have an anti-grooming tool as well, which we don't tend to spell out the details of it because that can be to give the game away, but we also have technological solutions working to try and prevent that kind of activity as well. I think I should address the issue of data. It's come up a good bit, and actually it was one of the things I raised at our table as well, because I think there's a fair degree of fear and suspicion around the use of data, which I understand, and it's probably a key part of what we need to build into the education around this. Somebody at table 2, I think it was asked, who owns your data? You own your data. You're the only person who has control over it. And I think that's a point that's lost on a lot of people. You can take it back at any time, you can delete it. And in fact, your rights around your data will increase under the GDPR, because you can now take it to another service. You can decide, well, I don't want Facebook to have it anymore, but I want to take it with me and move it to a different service. And this is all what happens now, or will have to happen going forward. Somebody else made a point earlier about data being sold. I can't speak for all platforms, but certainly I can speak for myself. I can speak for Google, and I can speak for Twitter. We do not sell your data. This is a common point that I forget to point it out sometimes, because it's almost established there as a given that we do, and we absolutely do not. There were a lot of issues raised around ads. There are a lot of protections for under 18s when it comes to the kinds of ads that are served to them. They're protected on our platform and on Instagram from anything like gambling, dieting solutions, dating sites, alcohol. All of those sorts of things are not, those kinds of ads are not served to young people. But I do think there's a huge opportunity here for awareness raising and education around the use of data. I think a lot of the fear and suspicion comes of not understanding why is that pair of Nike runners that I looked at on Nike.com following me around the internet. There's a really straightforward, easy answer to that. And I think we need to engage more with it. And under the GDPR, people have rights. You have the right to object to the processing of your data. There are various different legal obligations that processors must adhere to. If you give your data for one type of use, it cannot then be used for a different kind of processing. It can only be used for the stated purpose that it was collected for. So, look, these are not things that I had anticipated talking about a lot today, but I think it's right to address them. And I know we won't always agree on all of the issues around this, but I think it's important to have the conversation and to acknowledge it. I'm grasping for my notes here to see what else I should be talking about, but I think the EU-led initiatives that one of the tables at the back mentioned are key to this as well, because there's a lot of work happening and a lot of coordination happening behind the scenes, or at least, I mean, it's front and centre for us, but it seems to be behind the scenes for others. And the Alliance to Better Protect Minors, which we are a part of, is a key part of that as well. That has targets for companies like mine. We must respond to those targets, and there'll be a report on that later on this year. So I guess that's a smattering of the things that have been raised, and if people have questions, I'm sure we would all be happy to respond.
Okay, thanks, Niamh. Okay, I'm going to quickly move to questions. So if anybody has a question, and ideally a question, not a statement of something, so ask a question, and can you keep it as brief and concise as possible. I'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and if you can direct your question at a panellist, if that's appropriate, can you do that? So if I can see hands up, So there's one here and one. So we'll start off with those two anyway. That might prompt more.
Hi there. Sebastian Hamilton from the Irish Daily Mail. We have a particular view on this. Just to ask the panel a simple question. What do you think is the youngest age at which a child should own their own smartphone? Not have access to the internet, but should be given their own smartphone? Thank you.
Okay, and the second question, which was back a little bit, yeah. And if you say who you are, that would be great. Who is the second question? Okay, and then there was another hand, yeah, behind. Okay, so we'll take those three questions, and then I'll go back to the panel.
Noel Howard, Social Care Ireland. It's about age again. In the context of the discussion, and it has been raised, and Grania said that this is the child protection issue of our time. If it is, isn't lowering the age of digital consent to 13 an absolute contradiction?
Okay, and was there another question? Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, excuse me, we spoke about a lot, particularly on the first panel, about the extreme issues like terrorism, child sex abuse and so on, which thankfully only affect a minority. What I'd be concerned about, and I wonder, are you as concerned, are the issues that affect a huge number, I think, particularly of younger people, which would be around the amount of screen time, particularly younger children are getting, and even adults, which leads to addiction. Anton spoke about looking now at the problems of the future. Another big concern, I think, would be anxiety in particularly younger girls, I think, from the use of social media. And I'm wondering, would you consider them issues? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to just pass it back to the panel, and if there are other hands, if you could indicate to that you're ready to ask a question. So who'd like to start off with that, with those three? They're interlinked, those questions. I think, Brian, do you want to
Sure.
start?
Yeah, they're key issues that have been raised in many different fora, and I think these are questions that are quite pointed because they're quite specific. And as a researcher, I always try and contextualize and put this in a wider context in terms of what evidence we have, what we know about what are the risks and so on. So in relation to smartphones, I really do kick back against this question sometimes because it's a particular device when we are living in an entire environment that is ever more connected, where we rely on information and using that information in all sorts of ways. It is a key question, I think, that many parents and children will have, and they need to be informed to be able to make that kind of decision. And it would be inappropriate of me to set out, there is a defined age. Of course, we have to take on all of the kinds of advice in terms of developmental appropriateness and what is good for a child and the child's evolving capacities to be able to use technology responsibly. And that is my response to this question and the issues that have been raised around this. It is a complex area and it's not one in which we can have a very simple answer, and I'm not sure that it actually helps the debate in terms of supporting children and protecting them, to put it in quite that way. Obviously, I share many of the same concerns that parents will have, and teachers and others who work with young people, and about their exposure as vulnerable young people, and will need to respond in an appropriate way around this. So similarly in relation, the child protection issue of our time, I do also sometimes push back against this, again singling out, because as we have discussed today, the internet is part of our lives now and is very much part of our future, and we have to think as deeply as necessary in terms of something that is so fundamental around that. And it does involve significant responsibilities towards provision and proper support and the quality of experience that young people have, and understanding where that experience is not what it should be. And I think it's in that context we have to have very necessary protections, but we have to look at it in that way. And I'm afraid that the same response in relation to screen time, there is a very understandable understandable desire from parents to know how much is enough, how much is too much. But I know as I call myself a digital grandparent because I have a 6-month-old grandchild, and the digital experiences of children from the moment of birth and in that wider context now presses us to look at all of these issues around screen time. And the screen time, we feel like it is almost enforced on the very youngest. And it is within the environment in terms of our tablet devices, our games consoles, our uses of technology to communicate. We do need to go back to the developmental concerns, the educational concerns, and really help parents in terms of making sure that they're nurturing an environment that uses technology in beneficial ways.
Okay. Killian, you're a young person. I mean, should we take all those smartphones off everybody?
We're sort of like, we're moving into a new era now. It's like when, like back years and years ago, when we moved from like more ancient ways of writing on like rocks, whatever, to then going into like books. Or like even just writing on paper. Do you think there was people then saying, no, keep writing on this rock, the paper is too advanced? Like, yeah, it's a stretch, but it's a similar sort of thing. We're moving from like what we used to have, where we always were writing on paper, to now we're moving to a more digital age where we're doing, like some schools are bringing iPads and everything's done through school. So really, I don't think like there should be a limited age. It should be really up to the parent to decide themselves. Like there can be guidelines, but really it's up to the parent to decide, is their child mature enough to be able to handle it? And yeah, really.
Okay, thanks. Anton, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing about the smartphone, is it's only in the context of all the other things. So if the child doesn't have a smartphone, but they spend all their time at home playing with the computer, that's just as much an issue. Or if they're at school and they spend all their time at the computer in the school, so it's quite a difficult issue, and it's quite a judgment, and you can't knock it on. In terms of anxiety, anxiety and addiction as a future, addiction is certainly an interesting one, but anxiety, I have a feeling that teenage girls were always anxious. And they might be anxious about different things now, but that's part of growing up, and part of growing up is finding out to some extent about the darkness of the world and the darkness inside. And now it's happening through the internet instead of these other systems, instead of in the playground or at nightclubs or whatever it is. And I would say that the other side of it is how a young woman is empowered. For example, I think young women used to genuinely believe that models and people in magazines were genuinely a lot more beautiful than they were. But now they actually can go on YouTube and they can see the makeup video and they can see how the whole thing was put together with the green screen and all the rest. And so they seem very obsessed with it, but at the other side, there's also a sophistication emerging. On the consent issue, I don't have a strong view on what the age of consent, the digital age of consent. I would say there's a few things. It's very difficult to deal with this issue because sometimes kids don't give their true age when they fill in an online form. And the other issue is that consent is not the be-all and the end-all of data protection. Do people ever, and this is for adults as well, do they really know what they're consenting to? Is consent a carte blanche? There's still a lot of responsibility on the service provider to do the right thing with the data. And that goes across the board, and I think it's an important debate and something to discuss, but it's not the be-all and the end-all of it.
Yeah, I'll maybe start with the third question, because I think we did touch on, but we maybe haven't talked enough about, and a number of people mentioned the distinction between legal and illegal, and harmful behaviour. And a number of the calls to Childliner that come to the ISPCC are from young people who haven't been the victim of a crime, but feel harmed and have been harmed. But we also work very closely with other organisations who provide therapeutic services to children who've been abused, and those services, such as Carrie, are woefully under-resourced. So I think there's a bigger debate to be had about what are the supports that currently exist for children and young people who have had some form of either harmful or criminal behaviour visited on them online. And I wouldn't want that to be missed from this piece, because we've talked a lot, I think, about the law and institutional frameworks and all that, but you know, there's a child in the middle of all this, and if a child has been harmed in some way, we need to ensure that they can access services. And I always say, because I've learned it since I've worked at the ISPCC, the method of a child's disclosure profoundly affects their ability to heal following abuse. So if a child believes they are listened to, if they can access services quickly, then they are much more likely to be able to continue with their childhood. So put that to one side. The second question, this is not an easy answer, and the ISPCC, we don't choose those kinds of questions. This is the digital age of consent, for example. We don't choose our answer lightly. We base it on evidence, we base it on what young people tell us. But the GDPR, first of all, is a major piece of legislation that evolves and is evolving in terms of protecting children's data. And as I said earlier, it is a game changer. It will entirely change how organisations, every organisation in this room, thinks about and processes children's data. So we didn't look first at the digital age of consent and go, we'll pick that age first. We looked first at how is the law changing? And the law is massively improving in terms of the protection of children's data. There are things that companies will simply not be able to do. They will not be able to exploit children's data. They will not be able to use it for advertising. They will not be able to sell it forward. And there's a whole range of things that this new law will immediately put into place. As I said earlier, how it's enforced, that's the big question. I spoke to a number of experts only in the last few days who have said to me they are worried about enforcement rather than the law. So that was the context in which we made that decision. Alongside that, we listened to young people who told us this. We will lie. If we want to access something online and age verification is weak, we will lie. So we have a responsibility as the National Child Protection Organisation when we make a decision to balance a whole range of things. And given how weak age verification is in a number of areas, some companies do it very well, others don't. There's no national accreditation for age verification in Ireland. There should be, but there isn't. We have taken the decision that given the legal context, the GDPR is significantly strengthening digital protection. And given all of the other things that we know about how young people think and behave online, we've made the decision that we believe it should be 13. I want to come on to the last question because they're both linked. The answer to this is evidence, and the answer to this is data. So I believe that we should build in to the Data Protection Bill a review. And I think we should look at and review whole aspects of how the bill works, or the Act as it will become works. And I have no problem if evidence shows us 3 years from now, 2-3 years from now, that actually the digital age of consent should be another age. I have absolutely no problem saying the evidence shows us it should be a different age. Let's go with that age. And I think what's missing generally, because this is such an emerging area, is as much evidence as we possibly can. And I feel really sorry for parents who have to, and this is to your point, Sebastian, who have to make decisions about, should I buy my child a smartphone for Christmas or not? That's a really difficult question for a parent to answer. And maybe it would be easier if a whole load of organisations put their hands up and said, this is the age it should be. The ISPCC will not make that call because we work with children with an entirely different range of both emotional and development needs, and we will never ever tell parents what to do. What we will do our very best is to give them some advice and direction and guidance, but we cannot remove a parent's right to make that really important decision. So that's the reason we give you that answer, and all of the 6 journalists who've called our offices in the last month on this campaign, I've given them the same answer. So thank you for that, Sebastian. You're keeping me busy.
Thank you. And finally, Niamh, do you want to briefly comment on?
Yeah, I think I probably have most to say about the third question. On the first one, I mean, it would only amount to a personal opinion. I don't know how valuable that is, but well, as a non-Facebook position on this, on a personal opinion, I think it probably falls to parents to decide what the appropriate age is. On the digital age of consent, Facebook didn't make a submission to the consultation. We are members of the American Chamber of Commerce and IBEC, who did make submissions on this. I don't really have much to say about it other than to say that I think there's a lot of, understandably, because this is, this is data protection law. It's not sort of an everyday topic that we'd be addressing on a regular basis. But I think there's a lot of confusion as to what it's about. online safety is a hugely important topic. That's why we're all here today. And then, of course, data processing is a feature of that, but it's not about grooming, it's not about cyberbullying, it's not about all of those other things. And I think there's a huge conflation of all these issues when it comes to the digital age of consent. I suppose the one nexus where I do see them coming together is, as Grania and others have pointed out, where there's an incentive to lie about your age and to get around the checks and balances that companies like mine have in place. Because let's say you're a 13-year-old and you decide to say you're 16. For 2 years, you will receive the same in-app education around privacy and safety that I was talking about, and you'll be protected from the kinds of ads that we feel shouldn't be served to under 18s, like I said, gambling, dating, certain types of health products focused on dieting. But once that child hits 15 and the system thinks they're 18, all of those protections will go away. So I think that's where there's an issue. But the other thing I say, and I'm big into this at the moment because I've been doing a course in data protection law, is that consent is only one of several legal bases for processing data. And the nature of consent under the GDPR is that if you decide not to consent to the specific processing purpose that you're asked about, and they can't be bundled anymore. It has to be consent for each specific process. If you don't consent, you can't be penalised for that, meaning it can't be a take it or leave it approach. So things like sensitive categories of personal data, which include things like your religious views, your political views, your sexual orientation, they must require consent. You must, if they're to be processed. And you can imagine that would apply to a dating app, so they'd have to look for consent on that. There are other situations where it would arise as well. For example, around use of biometric data. Facebook has a product called facial recognition, which isn't operational in the EU, but there will be a consent moment around that. You know, and because it's biometric data, you must ask for consent. But if you're asking for consent and there's some detrimental effect that would follow if you don't consent, then that's not the correct legal basis. It's supposed to be one of the others, be that legal obligation, contractual necessity, legitimate interest for a business, whatever it be. And that's, again, back to this point about education. I think we really need to explore all of the issues this raises and try and bring people up to speed on what all of this means, because it's not something that's going to come and go with the data protection bill that's passing through. It's something that's going to be with us moving forward to an increasing degree. So it's not an answer to your question, but I think it's worth clearing up some of those issues, because I think a lot of people assume that consent means consenting to terms and conditions. Yeah. It's not the case.
Okay, great.
Oh, sorry, I never answered. Do you mind if I just briefly on the third question? Sorry. We are focusing a lot more on well-being and meaningful interactions. This is something that's emerged over time. We conducted some research recently about time being well spent on our platform, and what came out of that was that passive scrolling through your news feed is not good for your mental health, whereas meaningful interactions with people is extremely good for your health. Sorry. That's a sentence I reached for. I don't want to say extremely. Is better for you and not a draw on your mental health. So we're trying to focus more on well-being. Also, Instagram is part of the Facebook family of apps. There's a huge focus on body image around Instagram as well. So we make sure to partner with the organisations that have the expertise in areas around eating disorders, and we make sure that we have strong, robust policies around anything that promotes or glorifies eating disorders, and also that resources are available to our users to make sure that if they're dealing with that problem, that they get the right resources to them. So I think your question is a good one.
Okay. Is there anybody in the room with a question that absolutely has to be asked? You can't leave the room without asking it. In other words, we haven't really thrashed it out. So there's three. I'm going to take them very quickly, and I'm going to ask one panellist to answer. So you need to name the panellist you'd like to answer. Okay?
Thank you.
Choices.
Thank you. My name is Ciaran McMahon. Thanks to the organisers for the conference. Given that it is an open policy debate, I would like a panellist to give us one specific, clear policy recommendation that they would like the government to put into place by the end of the summer. I believe it is the recommendation. And I'll put that to Grania Long.
Okay, well, I mean,
I'll take the three questions and then you can answer
yeah.
them. So you have a minute to capture your thoughts. Okay, what was the second question and who's it for?
Mark Carpenter from Sky Ireland's for Brian. It's actually quite similar. It's very, very quickly, of the recommendations in the Internet Content Advisory Report, which do you think, of those that haven't already been implemented, which do you think should be the priority?
Okay, and there was a final hand up. Okay.
Hi, my name's Sarah Leader and I speak to children and parents in schools about online safety. One thing that hasn't been discussed, and I think I keep hearing, oh, the internet is part of our lives, it's all we can do, but something that really is, I hear all the time in schools is how much time very young children are spending online. Smartphones are coming back and again, it's not the problem. Smartphones not the problem, it is tablets. So many very, very young children have access, they're giving tablets at a very young age. I had a parent recently, a number of parents asked me to recommend a tablet for, I said, what age is your child? Junior infants. That's not uncommon. So I just don't understand why that's something we're not talking about, you know, the increasing amount of time, maybe directed towards Neve from Facebook to talk about that, with particular emphasis on the fact that actually that a lot of the Silicon Valley crowd don't allow their children access to these devices until 12, because no one seems to want to say, oh, you know, I don't agree with them under a certain age, you know, leave it to the parents. But we need guidelines on this. You know, I say to parents, do you want your child to be the guinea pig? To see, you know, throw them out there, let's see how they fare in their life going forward. But particularly with emphasis on young children, buggies, I see them in buggies, I see them all in restaurants. And it seems to be normalised behaviour, and I don't think that's right. Okay. I think we needed a conversation about that.
Okay, so the first question was Grania's.
Yeah, look, I think I would essentially ask of government now to put the action plan in place by the summer. But I think that action plan has to include what I said earlier. I would love to see an Irish Council for child internet safety, and I'd like to see that council being the group of people or types of organisations in this room, because I don't think this action plan, while it has to be driven by government, I think it needs to be owned by everybody who's in this space, so to speak. And I would expect to see that. And as part of that, planning for an Office for Digital Safety Commissioner with teeth, you know, with the powers. I mean, regulators only work when they have the power to regulate and really regulate, not self-regulation, regulate, and, you know, have the power to initiate investigations, have the power to enforce. That costs money, I know that, but I think that is specifically what we need. And I really agreed when somebody likened it to the Road Safety Authority. I think when we think about it in that way, it seems crazy that we don't have a national body that's thinking about the safety of our children online. Can I really quickly just answer your point? You're absolutely, totally right. You know, and maybe I didn't make that strong enough when I was talking earlier about evidence. I think a national office should be giving parents the kind of data and the kind of evidence to help them make that choice. How they make that choice will then be up to them. And I suppose that's my point. It's not for me to tell parents what to do, but I would have absolutely no problem nodding to a national office who's gathering data that is accepted and acceptable and recognised probably by the European Commission. So I think that's missing, and I do really feel very sorry for parents when they have to make those judgments without that data.
Okay. Which recommendation? I think that was addressed to you, Brian.
Great. The ICAG report, I'm delighted that it is having an airing because it had a menu of some 30 recommendations across a whole range of governance issues. The trigger for it really is the establishment of a National Council for Internet Safety. You know, we listened carefully to the Byron report at the time, and what was interesting is there's kind of a circular element going on here, because the Byron review referred very favourably to the, Ireland's Office for Internet Safety, and we looked at you know, what provision are we making centrally to give as that resource. But we presented a National Council, much like this body as we're talking about here, which would be a trigger for all of the other elements that we feel would be a good, you know, a good start, a good platform to get underway.
Yeah. Neve, do you want to add anything to Grania's comments in relation to the guidance for parents and very small children?
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant guidance for parents and enabling them. Actually, we've created a lot of resources. We have a parents portal to try and help people. Webwise have done a great job of building together a bunch of resources to help enable parents. On the point of access, I have 3 sisters. They all have children. I know they probably wouldn't have got through it if they didn't have In the Night Garden on the tablet at some point. But I think it's worth pointing out, and this gets forgotten, you must be 13 to have a Facebook account. You must be 13 to use WhatsApp or Instagram. And so I think there was an example given earlier on of an 11-year-old who was using an app and was served an ad for lip fillers, and the mother pointed this out. I mean, there's so many things captured in that point. I don't know of any apps for under 13s that would be serving ads for lip fillers. So there you have the knowing facilitation of somebody who shouldn't be on an app by somebody acknowledging so we know that they've lied to get onto the app because they're 11 instead of 13, and there's a good chance then that they've lied and said they're over 18. So I think the point I'm arriving at is you're really up against it when it's being facilitated by a guardian or somebody like that. But at what point do they start to get access to a device? Again, our education and materials and resources, they all start at 13 up because that's the age you must be. So it's probably not that helpful to you.
Sure.
No, I did meet with the new head of policy for Snapchat in London a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed all of these issues, so I know it's top of mind for them as well. As I said earlier, I think people assume technology is more sophisticated than it is. It's like you'd surface a lot of false positives and then you require human review. I think our resources and time are probably better spent invested in other areas where we can make a real difference. But I will say this, I regularly get people saying to me, I see a 7-year-old on Facebook or I see a 9-year-old on Instagram, and I say, well, why aren't you reporting it? Because that's the best way we can take action, is when it seems there's a lot of people who know about underage accounts and maybe they don't know how to report it, and that's on us. We need to do more education about that, but it's a very simple process, and so I think we all have to step up and say, well, if we see something.
You can't get a credit card if you're a child. You won't be allowed to. The bank will find out that you're not the age you say you are. Your Facebook, you've got hundreds of billions of dollars to spend. Could you not commit to establishing, at the very least, that the children who say they're a certain age actually are?
I mean, we do have certain technological fixes in place, but look, as Killian was pointing out, there are ways around these things, but also we're a global platform. What do you do if you're a child in Ghana and you don't have access to your parents' credit card, or you don't have access to your national ID? I think we have to remember there are limitations in place. You're going to exclude a lot of people, but certainly, you know, it's an issue. There's no doubt about it. But as I said, there are limits sometimes to what the technology can do, and that's the GDPR references that. It talks about the available technologies when it comes to parental authorization. So while we obviously have plans in place to deal with that, I wouldn't ever go as far as to say they're foolproof.
Okay, I'm going to draw this to a close, but I think it's probably a good point to draw it to a close, because it's indicative of the kind of issues that need continuous discussion and a lot more teasing out, and presumably a lot more development over time, both in terms of the technology, but also parental education. And I want to hand over to the Minister, but I'm conscious that you were at the Cabinet meeting for a while, so maybe just to comment on a couple of things that have been going on today. I suppose one of the things that seems clear to me, just listening to everybody talking and to the table discussions, is that there's now a sense of urgency to move on this issue into a much more structured approach. But usefully, there is also a real commitment from, I think, almost everybody we've heard from today, that that sense of collaboration is understood to be a core piece of how we move forward, that no single organisation or agency has the answer or can sort things out on their own. But I do think it's fair to say as well that there's an expectation of leadership from government, and it came up in terms of people referring to the fact that today is a reflection of some government leadership, and also a sense that government departments are working together. And I mean, in that sense, I think that's really important, because in Ireland we haven't been terribly good at getting that right, and yet here's a great opportunity to do something which requires cross-government involvement. There's a real sense that education education, education is a critical piece of the dynamic here. And I think, listening to everybody talking, there's an enormous amount of things happening on these issues, whether in individual organisations or in collaborative pieces of work or through the European Union. But people tend not to know about it, just as the individual parent tends to feel, I really don't know where to go about this, I don't know how to get guidance on, you know, at what point do I do things, how do I make the assessment of my child, and so on and so forth. And I think really importantly, Minister, we have heard from young people here who have an awful lot to contribute to this, because I guess as older people, we have a tendency to focus on the, oh my God bit, the risk, the sense of overwhelming, you know, disaster pending, when in fact for most people, and for young people in particular, this is the future, this is now, this is what an awful lot of our other government policies are dependent on. And so we can't get away from that. So we need to trust young people, we need to listen to them, we need to include them in all of these kinds of fora where the kind of policies that will work can perhaps emerge. So I think it's great food for thought from everybody. I'm going to hand over to the Minister. Before I do, can I thank the panel, the second panel this afternoon, for their inputs. Can I thank all of you from all of the different walks of life that you've come and all of the experience and wisdom you've brought. And certainly I hope that the wish that you've expressed here, that this is the start of an ongoing conversation, is something that happens. So Minister, if I can pass over to you to conclude proceedings.
Thanks very much, Caroline. And let me begin by thanking some of the people that have contributed to today's event. First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending and participating in today's discussion. I think it has been a very, very useful discussion in kick-starting this whole process. I'd like to thank Caroline McCamley for her excellent way in which she has facilitated this debate here today. I'd also like to pay a special word of thanks to Gail Kent for travelling here today to give the European Commission's perspective on the wide-ranging subject of online safety. And I think it is an area where we can work far closer together to move this agenda forward. I'd like to thank my Cabinet colleagues for their support in organising today's event. As the Taoiseach referred to earlier, at the recent hearing of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children and Youth Affairs, 4 Cabinet Ministers attended that and presented. That is unprecedented in this country, and it shows the priority that we are all giving to the issue of online safety and the concerns that are being expressed to each and every one of us by the public in relation to this issue. Today's event has been coordinated by 6 government departments, a further sign of the government's commitment of having and demonstrating a joined-up approach to online safety. I particularly want to thank Trina Quill, Dulce O'Brien and Brendan O'Reilly within my own department and the team that backed them up in relation to it, and right across government, the other staff and officials that helped out. I'd like to thank the panellists, our table facilitators, and those of you who made today's event possible. But picking up on something that Caroline said earlier, I particularly want to welcome the WebWise ambassadors, and I think they deserve a round of applause. Because far too often we talk down to young people rather than actually talking with them. And I think one of the trends that I've seen from the contributions that I heard here, and I wasn't here for the full debate, was the need to engage with young people as parents, but also as legislators and those responsible for putting standards in place. And I think it is important to have their input into today and their input into whatever comes forward from this event today. As someone that's been involved in politics for a few years now at this stage, I think one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in politics is the silo perspective in government in relation to issues and challenges. And it's not just an Irish problem. Talking to my other 27 colleagues at the Council of Ministers on Monday, it's an issue right across Europe and I'm sure right across the world. And it was an issue that was also there in the private sector up to quite recently. but that has been broken down in the private sector and has allowed for a huge level of innovation. I think Project Ireland 2040 is the first real practical step by government to actually address that silo mentality across government. As politicians, we're often accused of kicking complex problems down the road. What I've tried to do as Minister with complex problems is to bring the sector together, the public sector, the private sector, everyone that's involved in the area, and see if we can try and problem solve in relation to an issue. Today's forum is the third such forum that our department have led in the last 6 months in relation to issues. By far the most complex is the one that we're dealing here today, but it's the same format that we have been using. I think it's clear from the debate that has gone on here today that online safety is not a neat subject that can be clearly labelled or defined. We all know what we want to achieve, and our priority is to keep children safe online. But there is no one road that we can take to get there, and we must all work together across stakeholder groups to achieve our common goal. I think Cillian put it well earlier on when he said it's about collaboration, about coordination across the different sectors. And Caroline said that in her summing up. It's that sense of coordination and collaboration that's needed across the sector. And I think up to now, many people sat back and said, look, this is not our problem, it's someone else's problem. I think the impetus is there from today and the momentum is there now for all of us to work together and to move forward in relation to this. We also have to bear in mind that the issues and technologies are rapidly evolving. So it's not as simple as changing the law and walking away. We must constantly be vigilant and work together on an ongoing basis to make the internet a safer place for our children. Some people are frustrated and claim that nothing will happen, that this is just a talking shop here today. And let me remind some of you here today that during the noughties, over 500 children disappeared from state care. 90% of them were never found. No one asked questions because they were no one's son, they were no one's daughter. It was a scandal that went on when we had the big economic boom in this country, and yet it got very little notice, very little coverage. As some of the NGOs here today know, I personally took up this particular issue. I pressurised the government at the time until we got a proper and secure care system put in place for unaccompanied migrant children. And thankfully, children are not going missing from state care today in the way that they did in the past. So I have a personal agenda here. I'm committed to this issue, and I've proven that in the past. And I'm determined to work with my colleagues across government to move this agenda forward. Listening to today's events and hearing the contributions from the panellists and participants, I was struck by the diverse range of issues in relation to online safety and how complicated these subjects are. I believe that today's event was absolutely necessary so we could all gain a better understanding of each other's position and identify practical steps that we can all take together. Speaking as a parent, I think we need to give us as parents the tools to make informed decisions. Anton said that we need to, encourage, insofar as possible, parents to become far more active in this area. And yes, we do need to provide parents with information. We need to provide parents with the guidelines in relation to that. I think David Stanton, earlier on in his contribution, made the point that we are as a government, looking for ideas and to develop those ideas into practical implementable steps. Cillian also made the point that we need to teach young people and give them the tools to protect themselves. And I think that is important as well. And I think that's one thing that came across from many of the contributions today was the importance of education, the importance of awareness raising, and the resources to do that. I think resources in relation to law enforcement is another issue that clearly came across today, and I think it is something that we need to be very conscious of. So we need to map out now and scope out an action plan and provide more detail than has been required to date, including having a very much joined-up approach in relation to this issue. Killian, I think, spoke about rocks and books earlier, and I was just thinking about what he was saying. I think the issue here is in relation to the tools. And, you know, when the pen was invented, we didn't ban pens. And the pen is mightier than the sword. But it's what it's written with that. The output from that is the issue. And I think that's the one thing we all need to be very conscious of here and work towards ensuring that we protect ourselves, our families, our communities, and most importantly, our children. As the Taoiseach mentioned earlier, by the summer, the government will set out an action plan with an integrated set of measures to ensure that we can support online safety at all levels. A report of today's event will help to inform the development of that action plan. So I'd like to sincerely thank each and every one of you for participating today and hope that we can all continue to work to address our shared concerns in the future. And the one thing I'd say, and I've said this across government as well, we have to remember what all this is about. This is about protecting the vulnerable. And most importantly, it's about protecting our children. So let's all work together towards the common goal of protecting our young people and our children on online platforms. Go Míle maith agat.
Thank you, Minister. On that note, you can all go home and enjoy the rest of International Women's Day. Thank you for coming.